Prester's Tower, an Elsewhere story by Angelee Anderson, read by Stanley Anderson.
16th Scribble. A star, and a tower bell anchored to it. All right, Match, you knew best as usual. I thanked you kindly for your offer, but I said I'd copy Matt's scribble with my own hand. Well, I'd no sooner started before I realized how burdensome it was to keep looking back and forth between two parchments. How about if I read to you slowly and you scribble it? I'm sure you're very clever with your tale. Only try not to tread all over what you've just written. Are we ready? Matt wrote... What? No, Matt didn't write Matt wrote. I'm telling you to write it so as none that reads will think what follows for the next couple of scribbles is in my words. You crip? Magnific. Now, are we ready? Matt wrote, I was a foundling, so I never knew my Matt and Pat, the same as most in Pat's grandfam never knew theirs. The Matt and Pat that found me were old. They'd been wedded a full 45 years with no children, which wasn't common in our grandfam. And if not having children of their own made them sad at times, they made up for it by being like second Matts and Pats to the rest of the grandfam's children. Everyone in the grandfam at one time or another took a pause from their regular tasks and served the lady of the tower, bringing her food, helping her with the tower's upkeep, and taking wise words from her back to the rest of the grandfam on occasions when she couldn't do it herself. So my Matt and Pat in their old age had been given this task, begged for it actually. Somehow in all that time they'd never been asked. And for the moon that they attended on the lady, they told others they were more content than if they'd had a birth child to care for, account of the lady was so much fairer than any. Came to the last day to serve her, she told them that if they should go to the western sea, something would be waiting for them. The grandfam may have come from Whith, but they didn't go back Whith. Still, on the word of the lady, most of them would have done anything, and especially my Matt and Pat, who loved her so well. So Matt and Pat went the day's journey west, hand in hand, through the lady hair grasses, until they came within smell and then sight of the sea. They stood looking at it, and it was more beautiful than anything they could have imagined. They thought the sea itself must be the thing waiting the lady had spoken of. But as they were turning to journey back to their particular habitat, they heard a wailing from some width groundwards. They searched, and finally decided it must be a trick of the sea sound, so they turned once more west to bid the sea farewell. And Whith, at their feet, was a newly birthed girl-child, lying among the grasses as though it was her natural bedding. They lifted me and wrapped my nakedness in their own wearing-cloths, and walked east till past the grandfam's habitat they came to the sancty fount. Whith they bathed the salt spray off me with sancty water, and turned toward the tower to give silent thanks to the lady. Just then the tower bell started ringing and ringing, and they saw something like a light that wasn't from the fount or the ringer's stars. Then there was one last great burst of shining from the specially star, and everything looked as it was wont to do, and the bell stopped its ringing, except windwise. They took me back to the habitat and asked their nearest relation that had recently birthed to nurse me. Next day the grandfam discovered that the tower lady had gone elsewhere. I don't memorial Matt and Pat themselves, but it's their voices I hear singing me the lullaby. When I was 3 and had just been weaned, they told my nurse that they wanted to take one more journey to the sea to give thanks for me afore their legs got too weak to carry them so far. They never came back. None of the grandfam was brave enough to go search without a lady to guide them, but it was always their belief that Matt and Pat's time of going elsewhere came upon them, and that they laid their bones down on the shore, still holding hands. My belief has always been that a ship from our grandfam's original country came to bear them away, and it may even have been steered by the lady herself. My nurse had taken in another foundling 3 years afore me, and she aimed to keep the 2 of us with her as long as we needed her. She would have done it anyway, but the twins she'd birthed afore we came, a boy and a girl, had gone elsewhere since, and their Pat had gone too, and we were all the fam left in her particular habitat. This other foundling was a boy-child who'd been discovered by stone-gatherers near the base of the mountain with the flood falls. He had dark hair and dark eyes, which isn't too common among our grandfam. The fam thought he might have been brought across the flood or along the mountains by the grandfams to the east or to the north. Weren't any fams to the north, though, unless there was something like a fam in the town and the castle on the east mountains. That was a place of pride-child rumor, though none of the grandfams could say why. But even if this boy-child had come from a place they'd no trust of, they knew they must take him in all the same. If they seemed a bit shy around the both of us, for no one knew what I'd come from either, Neither of us blamed them, account of we were never shy around each other. From the time I knew who Cousin was, we were the best of friends. We chose to call each other cousin, though it was near impossible that we were any bodily relation, account of while brother and sister had the wrong kind of closeness to it, friend had the wrong kind of farness. Whenever we weren't called to separate tasks, we were together. My wearing cloth color was blue, and his was brown, and I loved best of bespringing things the lavender and wore it about me at feasts, and he loved the stone crop that grew near the base of the mountains, which he'd been found. We played together, and we sang together, and we wandered as far from the habitat as we dared together. But more than anything, we talked together. We'd sit amongst the wildflowers, surrounded by critters of whatever sort, and we'd make like we were going to tell a story. He'd say, "You start, cousin," and I'd say, "No, you," and he'd say, "No, you," till we laughed at ourselves and both began talking at once. What did we talk about? What didn't we talk about? Then sometimes we'd fall quiet and hold cousinly hands for a bit, and then maybe doze off and wake up and start talking all over again. And if we were out at all after dark, we'd point to our name stars. "Thith's mine," he'd say. "Thith's mine," I'd say. And we'd go back and forth between the two till we were too tired to do anything but go back to nurse. Neither of us was ever angry with the other, and though we didn't avoid the rest of the grandfam, we mostly didn't seek them out either. Nurse, like the rest of the fam, thought we took pretty good care for one another, and that's the way it went on till cousin was 13 and I was 10. He was big for 13, almost a man, and he was the fairest to look at of any of us. Girls all ready to be women looked at him like they might be hoping to set up a particular habitat with him some day. But cousin never looked back at any of them the same. I thought for a while it was account of he wasn't ready to think about that yet, but one day something happened that told me I was wrong. We were sitting together in a place where the ground was soft enough to draw in. We'd make pictures thith, and play games, and I'd practice my letters thith. Cousin was keen in other ways, but never took much to scribbling. He cared more about things he could fash with his hands. Pretty soon I noticed he was quieter than usual, and really solemn about drawing something complicated. He'd fash a line, then rub it out, and put it back in just the tiniest bit different, as though that difference was the most portentous thing in the world. I asked him what he was drawing. "Habitat," he said shortly, and went back to drawing. "Seems a bit square-edged for a habitat. I mean, it doesn't flow in curves at all like the star places do." He frowned and fashed the edges even sharper. This hurt me a bit, it was so unlike him, but then I thought maybe I'd hurt him by remarking on his drawing, so I tried to smooth it over by asking, "Whose particular habitat?" "Ours," he said even more shortly, and kept drawing. His voice had grown very manly by then, but it seemed harsher than afore, too. "But we already have a particular habitat, with Nurse." "Not Nurse's habitat, yours and mine." Now men and women, young or old, don't set up particular habitats by twos on their own unless they've discerned that they are meant to be wed and be mats and pats together. I knew this, and cousin knew I knew it, but, not knowing how else to respond, I pretended to think he was making up a story. "If it's going to be my habitat, I might want to change a few things from the way you've drawn it," I said lightly. "But of course we can't know yet who we'll share habitats with when we're grown." "I do know, and I'm mostly grown." "Well, I'm not," I laughed, and I didn't want to hear any more of such talk for a good long while yet. What's the use of thinking of something so far thith till you get close to thith? I like to know whith I'm going afore I get thith, and it's not that far thith. I didn't say anything else then. I could tell he was perfectly solemn. I hoped maybe it would pass soon, and we could talk of it again a few years on. But after that, though he was still my best friend, he started being a worry to me, and I couldn't tell him all my heart as I had afore, and I could see he wasn't telling me all of his any more either. After that, he seemed more out about tasks that didn't include me. I had plenty of my own to see to. Besides letters, I was learning to spin and weave and to fash savory meals and loving the doing of all those. Cousin liked my meals, but he never said much about what he'd been working at. Then one day, when we hadn't really had a close talk for what seemed like forever, he took me by the hand and said he had something to show me. I thought of asking whether it was another habitat plan, but decided I'd better not. He led me north to the mountains and into a cave I hadn't known was thith. He sat me on the floor, turned to get some things, and laid them before me. His eyes shone with pride. I could see there were tools of a sort, but they were shapes I didn't recognize. "What is this?" I said, pointing to a complication of metal and hide. "What's it for?" Bridle, he said, for a horse. But the grandfam doesn't ride horses. The only horses are those on the mountains, and those are free. Others ride them. Others have tamed them. And that's what I'm going to do. And we'll ride off on one, you and I, and make a particular habitat somewhere else. But I don't want to go somewhere else. And I don't want a tamed horse, cousin. I can't crip this. And speaking of things I can't crip, what is that? I asked, pointing to the other thing. A blade on the end of a slender beam that looked like it might be used to make holes or plant seed in, only it was too broad in comparison of its sharpness. Spear, he said, to defend you with. Defend me from whom? I was getting really scared now. And anyway, the grandfam doesn't use weapons. Some others do. But back to defending me, who would mean me harm? Anyone. Everyone. I don't know yet. That's why I have to be ready. No one's going to take you away from me. Cousin, I don't belong to you. Yet, he retorted. Run along home to nurse now, little girl. I've got a man's work to do. And after that I tried to make sure I was never alone with him. From cousin to little girl, said with such scorn. My heart has never been quite whole since. Another year and more went by, and I saw less and less of him. He didn't always come for meals, and when he did, he said nothing. And it seemed the fermented grain he drank brought out more of the things in him I wasn't wanting to see. He didn't come to our particular habitat till late at night, if he came at all. And I felt, I can't crip how, that grandfam's whole place of habitat wasn't quite as fair or as clean as it had been. When I did see cousin, which was mostly mossy gathering with some other young men about his age, he looked like he hadn't washed, or if he had, it was in something less pure than the sancti fount. He and his friends, if that's what they were, would go silent when I went by, and just stare at me. When I'd pass, they'd start laughing among themselves, cousin loudest of all, and I'd sense that he'd been telling something about me that ought not to be told. I got more and more sad and worried, but there was no one I could unburden myself to. I thought if we had a tower lady like of old, I might tell her, but there'd been no tower lady since I was found. Then, thinking of her, I started wondering whether it wouldn't be a thing to try to ask for a new tower lady. I didn't know who to ask except the sancti people above, especially the bell ringer and the 7 sibs. I thought maybe if I went up to the tower, as no one was supposed to do except it was their task, that maybe the sancti ones could hear me better. I dared not tell anyone what I planned. It's the type of thing I might have told cousin in the Agon days, but now I thought on it, I remember him never caring much about the lady, which was the one feeling we didn't share. When I'd mention her, he'd laugh and say, "You're enough of a lady for me. I'd rather hear you sing than the bell ring." Somehow it seemed wrong of him to say that, and now I memorialed it, it seemed wronger still, like a dark hint of something pride-child to come. I had to go to the tower in secret, which meant at night. I opened the door, climbed the winding stairs, and asked the 7 sibs and the ringer's belt stars, including my name star, for a lady, and was just going to ask the others when the bell ringer himself descended to me and took me up journeying. Instead of a lady, he gave me himself, and he gave me the verse. Don't think there was more than a glimpse in my heart that I might be the next lady. It was something too bold to be thought on, though if the grandfam came to see it and asked me, I knew I couldn't refuse. But what I did crip from then was that there would be no particular habitat with a pat for me, account of the ringer had taken my heart, and there was no thought of me of taking it back, whatever task I was set to do. The whole grandfam was asleep when I got back to nurse's. It took me a while to lose my wonder enough to sleep myself, but I did at last. Don't memorial what else I dreamt, but I did dream that I had started the bleed, and come morning-wise it happened that that was true. I didn't tell nurse then, but went off to the sancti fount to wash myself. I wasn't afraid, but it didn't matter to me the way I once thought it would. Account of after last night I knew I would not be a mat. I washed like I was still in a dream, and when I turned to leave the sancti fount, that was cousin. I still loved him, though I couldn't crip him any more, but I held out one hand to him, not both like I used to in days agone. He didn't take it. He smiled, if that was what it should be called, but it wasn't friendly, much less cousinly. He said, "You've started the bleed, haven't you, little cousin? Or not so little any more." It was not something that should have been said so casual, but even that wouldn't have bothered me so much if he'd said it like he was concerned or even glad. I really didn't want to talk about it, but I had to say something. "Yes, I have," I admitted, "just last night. But how could you know?" "Got a sense of smell on me, don't I? You have a whiff about you of something that's not lavender." I don't know if this was so, but I was glad that he hadn't taken my hand. Not that I felt I was unclean, but that he was. "I've got a habitat to start fashioning, cousin," he said, "in a place I've chosen. You wouldn't know it. Might take, 2 years. When it's done, you'll be ready?" Though his voice lifted a little, it wasn't a question, but a warning. So after only one night's peace, my love for the bell ringer began to be mingled with a terrible dread. Not a dread of the ringer, not of him at all. 17th Scribble. Unmated Queen. Was supposed to be met, but she was robbed. Another morning-wise match, and another scribble. I hope you rested better than I did last night. I'm glad you're the one inking this and not me. I expect we should start again with something like, "Then Matt wrote." Oh, Match, the greater part of me doesn't want to read what Matt wrote next. I feel all her dread as though it was my own, and I can crep a deal of what came next without knowing it, account of what I do know. But I owe it to Matt to tell her story, account of it's not just her story, it's mine, and I expect it's Presters as well. Then Matt wrote, 2 years passed without me seeing cousin. Whether he is off fashioning a particular habitat, as he had said, or not, it was both better and worse not seeing him, and the 2 years seemed to take for always to go by, and at the same time to be no more than one night's dream. I think I would have dreaded myself to death over him, had it not been for something else that happened during those 2 years. Starting from the night I visited the Lady Tower, which I had told no one, the Grandfam started looking at me in a way they hadn't afore. As I've said, they'd always been a bit shy of me, account of not knowing whith I'd came from, but now they began to be shy in a different way that was almost like boldness. Hith, an elder, thith, a younger, now someone I was familiar with as nurse, then someone I'd hardly seen but on feast days. I couldn't crip this, account of I was so young, but they'd asked me whether I'd seen anything on the star maps that could help them plan things better. At first I didn't at all know how to answer them, but the more they came, the more I felt I did know how to answer. I couldn't read the star maps, but I had been to the sancty places above and seen a deal, so what I had seen I told them as if it was something I had read, account of it was all I had to give them, and it was a help to them, and a comfort to them, and a joy, and that itself was a help and comfort, and, yes, even a joy to me in the midst of my dread. Came time they'd give me the center seat at feasts and strew lavender around me, and ask me to teach them something altogether. I'd tell them a bit hith and a bit thith, but mostly I didn't know what to tell, and I could see they wanted something they weren't being given. Then one feast, more than a year after I'd started the bleed and cousin disappeared, it came to me as if I'd heard it from the lips of the bell ringer himself that I could teach the Grandfam the verse. I couldn't tell him what it meant, account of I didn't know myself, but I could tell him what it was. That night I chanted to them song-like, which was new, as we never had used words in our songs. There'll be a star. There'll be an unmated queen. There'll be a cottage on a moor. There'll be a cave in a wood. There'll be a black horseman and a blue flower. There'll be something scarlet. There'll be a room hung in green. There'll be a crooked town and a castle twisted. There'll be a prisoner and a pair of ram-hide boots. There'll be a dying animal. There'll be a lullaby. There'll be white wings. And only then, and then only, Prester's tower. When I'd done, they were absolutely still and looking at me with shining eyes that saw something elsewhere. And afore the feast was over, a wedding this one, the Matt and Pat that were coming together asked me to chant it to them again. I can't count how many times I taught the verse after that, but it wasn't long afore the fam all knew it almost as well as I did. It scares me to say, but they saw it as being even more calming than the 14, and if the 14 didn't quite ground them as much as they wanted, they took to saying the verse afterwards. It scared me when I thought of the verse as coming from myself, but of course it didn't. I'd heard it in the sancty places, and though they didn't know that exactly, they knew that something like it must be true. And one day, 2 cousinless years later, there was a feast in honor of one who had gone elsewhere. At the end of it, the fam asked me to lead them in the verse. When I had done, the closest kin of the one who had gone, in the name of the whole Grandfam, gifted me with a white wearing cloth. No one who knew the Grandfam story could help but crip the portentous of that. It meant that I was to be the tower lady, unless I chose to say no. Had anyone asked by the Grandfam ever said no? If they had, the Grandfam had no memorial of it. I couldn't say no, but I couldn't say yes on the instant either. I asked their permission to go to the tower alone that night, which as far as they knew I'd never done. They watched me go up, then laid the cloth at the foot of the tower and went to their particular habitats. Soon as they turned to go, the bell ringer came in line right above the tower, and the bell started ringing without a breath of wind to stir it. I didn't sleep. I talked to the ringer all night. I wished he'd come down and take my hand and lead me up to the sancty places and give me counsel thith. He didn't, but he stayed in place over the tower all night, which was an elsewhere answer in itself, and the bell never stopped ringing, and I swear that, though I'd never heard more than a single pure tone from it afore, it was ringing the Grand Fam's lullaby. Next morning-wise, when I came down, the fam were all waiting for me. I picked up the white wearing-cloth from the tower's foot, and though the ground all round it was glistening with dew, there was none on the cloth. I held the cloth close to my heart, and went to the sancty fount and knelt down before it, and let the water fall on the cloth and on me. So the Grand Fam had their answer. All the rest of that day, and the few to follow, they prepared the tower for me as perfectly as they could, and helped me to prepare. The only one that didn't seem quite at ease was Nurse, but I knew that she was still mourning over Cousin. Then came the night I was to go up for good, and this I must do alone, and when I was inside at the top, I must change into the white cloth, never to go back to my own cloth color again, for I wasn't my own any more. I was the bell-ringer's, and through him, the Grand Fam's. The Grand Fam led me to the tower at the time of the ringer's placing over it, all of them, old and infirm, and babes in arms, and everyone in between. I remember seeing a few of them that had been friends of Cousin, and they didn't have that pride-child look to them any more. They, as well as the rest, were grateful to have a tower lady again at last, even if it was only me. They led me thith, and they left me, and I watched them till the last of them was out of sight. I went to the sancty fount to wash, and left my blue wearing-cloth by it. Then, holding the white cloth to me, but otherwise unclothed, I turned to the tower. I went to it and opened the door, and was about to step inside when I heard a sound close by me. The ringing of the bell had kept me from hearing it sooner. It was a sound of hoofs. I turned to see whether one of the critters that give us milk had wandered hith, drawn by the bell as they sometimes were. It was Cousin, dressed in his brown cloth, but wearing a black cloak over it, astride a black horse bridled with what he had fashed and shown me. Whether he'd been watching the Grand Fam from afar or for some time, or whether he was somehow drawn back to the very night of me going up, I don't know. He didn't look surprised at seeing me with the white cloth held against me. He didn't look angered either. I have no words to scribble how he looked, except that there was something about his face, and even his strong body, that seemed not only crooked, but twisted. The spear he had made to defend me was with him, but he had it secured along the horse's side. "Cousin," I said. I don't know what I would have said after that, but he didn't wait to hear it. He rested his hand on the spear for a moment, and looked at me so sharp I felt he had slain me with it. Then he turned the horse toward the Starflood, in a place too deep to be forded, except with the help of the beast he rode. The last I saw of him, his head and the beast's were turned toward the eastern mountains. If he'd stayed, I meant to turn from him and go into the tower and shut the door behind me. He was across the flood afore finally I did turn. I crossed the threshold like a bride would, carried by love from my bridegroom, and I climbed the tower and clothed myself in white. And though my joy in belonging to the bell-ringer and being his lady was so great that nothing could completely take me from it, I neither sought the bed the Grand Fam had fashioned for me that night, nor sought the stars above. I dropped to the floor and lay face downwards, and thith my brining finally wore me to sleep. Another 2 years agone, and I was full grown. My life was the tower, and the bell-ringer, and the Grand Fam. I was among the fam at times, but only when they'd gather at the tower to hear the sancty news. The ringer and his stars talked to me, and I talked to them. I came out o' nights to wash in the sancty fount, and then, though the Grand Fam had all gone to their particular habitats, all the critters I'd ever seen, and some I never had, would visit me to ensure I wasn't lonely. And strange to tell, as solitary a life as it would seem to most, I wasn't. Cousin and almost any other kind of fretfulness came into my head less and less. I hoped, I prayed he'd gone for good, to wit he could find some peace away from me, account of I knew he'd never find it when he was near me. 2 years agone I'd almost forgot about him. When I memorialed I didn't brine. And then came a night like any other, when I washed myself at the sancty fount, but I wondered a bit that not one critter had come to bid the day good-bye. Then I heard the voice of a critter, and it was a horse. I hoped for an instant it was a stray from the mountains, but I knew that was vainty, account of they never strayed hith. This horse had been ridden, driven more than was good for it. I could tell by the sound of its breathing. I hasted to go to the tower and close myself in, but I was too slow. Cousin was thith afore me. His breathing was like the horse's, like something had driven him too hard. His spear wasn't along the horse's side now. He was holding it in his hand. He said, "Don't cry out, cousin, and raise the grandfam. Not for fear I'll use this weapon on you, but if you cry out and they come—" He didn't need to say any more. I felt that I'd been turned to stone. I wish I had, or that I could make him do it, but it wasn't in my power. He laid hold, not hard, of my white wearing-cloth and said, "I expect you'd better take this off. You wouldn't want it to get soiled when I lay you on the ground." "Don't do this, cousin," I begged, I don't know how many times. The last time, before there was no time for begging, I said, "Don't do this in the name of all that's sancty." Those were not words that he knew how to hear. What could I do when he was so much stronger than I? If I cried out, the grandfam would be threatened, and I wasn't going to let the pain of this fall on anyone but me. Pain there was. Even had I not been a maid, he was too ungentle to cause me anything else. But the worst pain was in my heart, and in it my body seemed miles apart then. I tried imagining that I really was a mat to his pat, and we were in our own particular habitat after our wedding, and I couldn't. I tried doing the 14 in my head, and I couldn't. I tried the verse. I tried crying out to the bell ringer, and I couldn't. The only thing I found I could do was to call out to all the past ladies of the tower. They would crip what this meant, as no one else on earth ever could. They would know that I'd meant to be one of them and had it taken away. When cousin had done with me, he didn't say anything, but washed in the sancty fount, which ought, in justice, to have swallowed him, and made ready to write again. Like an afterthought, he tossed my white cloth back over me with I lay. I couldn't let him go without a word, though I had none. But when I looked at him, even after what he'd done, I suddenly glimpsed again for an instant the friend I had lost. "Cousin, what have you become?" It was a cross between a cry and a whisper. "Father of your child." "You can't know that." "Nor can I. But if it's true, what will the grandfam think of their unmated queen a few months hence? They'll think they've been betrayed, and they'll think you've done it. And if it isn't true, they need never know a thing, need they? But you'll know. They need never think of me again. But you will. I've made sure of that. Your tower ladyhood will never be the same." He climbed astride his horse, which was more rested now than he was, and he turned his head away from me. But just afore he spurred it on, he turned back. Incredible as it seems, there was enough of a sorriness in him that he couldn't leave me that way. Leave me he did, but not till he'd said, "You could have been a mat to my pat, in our own habitat, never Hith, but away from Hith. But you wouldn't go, and now that this is done, I've begun to think you couldn't. That is what I can't crip, and I don't know that I ever will." It was a few days afore my bleed was due that he came and left me. Bleed didn't come. I crept then what that meant, but I heard it said if it doesn't come a second time you'll know for certain. I spent that maybe month trying to think what I would do. Cousin was right. Even if I wasn't with child, I'd never feel the same about being the lady of the tower again, but I couldn't quit being her. Grandfam needed me, and I'd made promises to the bell ringer. If I was with child, there was nothing I could think but that I would pour out all the bodily strength I had into the life of the child, and when it came there'd be no hiding it, and I couldn't think of what I'd do after. Second bleed didn't come. I started to feel weak and sick, but I hid it from the grandfam, though I couldn't hide it from them that sometime I didn't eat the food they brought me, and other times I asked them for more. Wearing cloths are loose, so till half the time was gone they wouldn't notice anything, but after that— About that half-time I told him that I had made a vow to the ringer and would be about his business a little more than usual. I told him to bring my food to the top of the stairs outside the tower room and leave it for me, and I'd leave them messages from the bell ringer that I'd scribbled, but that they couldn't see me except in the tower window till the time of the vow was past. They would never have thought of questioning the lady, but I questioned myself. I felt it was pride-child of me to lie to them, and yet I wasn't lying either. I was about the bell-ringer's business. He hadn't gotten a child on me, but he had allowed it to be gotten. Him that did get it on me meant it for bad, but the bell-ringer can't mean anything but good. And I thought, this child will be the bell-ringer's as I am his. And that one thought carried me through the months to come. Toward the end, I was so heavy it was hard for me to go up and down the tower stairs, so I only did it every few nights when I felt I couldn't bear any longer not washing in the sancty fount. If my travail had come on me in the tower, I doubt I'd ever have gotten down, and the child and I would have died in the tower afore the grandfam became alarmed enough to seek me out. As the ringer was merciful to me and his child, pains came one night after reaching the sancty fount. I'd made no plans for this, and I didn't know what I could do. I could cry for the grandfam if I had the strength, but I wasn't sure I had, and I didn't want them learning what had become of me in such a harsh way. Soon I couldn't think of anything but the pains, and I staggered, by chance maybe, in the direction not of the tower, but of the Starflood ford. I looked up at the ringer stars which were just coming into place above the tower, and the bell began to ring. I reached the ford, then I could go no further, and I fell to my knees, and then for a time the pains were all I knew. I was certain, after all, that the child and I would go elsewhere. For the first time in 2 years I was sorry to be alone. What happened instead was like a dream, and I thought it was one. Strong arms, not cousins, but somehow like them as they ought to be, lifted me. They carried me through the water and on to land again, and they carried me out of the dark, lit with stars, and to an inside place warmed with fire. They laid me down on something soft enough, but not too soft. Hands belonging to those arms tended me, and at last took my child from me. I think then I must have slept a little. When I opened my eyes and could rightly see, I was in a particular habitat, but different in shape from those of the grandfam. Firelight and its shadows were dancing on the walls, and Whith was a man, a few years elder than me, but not too much elder, with hair and eyes dark like cousins, nothing crooked or twisted about him. He was dressed in what looked like hide, and over all wore a woven cloth of gray. He smiled when he saw that I had come to myself. He laid a newborn child at my breast, but not afore unswaddling it, enough to show me that it was a boy. He put a dish of white flood lilies on the table beside me. He picked up something I had never seen but learned later to be a flute, and he played a melody for me that I thought only the grandfam knew. It was the lullaby. Now my scribble is coming to a close. When she's of age, I'll pass it on to my daughter specially, to do with as she wills. If she wants to know more of my story, she can hear it from the man that took me across the flood. She will have guessed by now that his name was Orion, afore he became her pat, and she may have guessed that the child born that night was her eldest brother, Charter. And she may even have guessed that cousin's name was Charter too. She may wonder why I named my child after one who had done me so much wrong, and I tell her that I had already forgiven him, and that I knew the child would grow to be the man his father ought. And she may have guessed what my name was afore I became a mat. If she hasn't cripped yet, she need only look toward the sancty mount and the side tree and the stars of the bell ringer, and know that my name's star is the same as hers. The same as hers. This isn't Matt speaking any more, Match. This is me. Have you scribbled it? The same as hers. I've got to go to Matt right away. I need to tell her that cousin, Charter's father, is in the cave under the sancty mount, and he says to say especially that he's sorry. I'm not the specially he means. I've got to get to Matt right away. 18th Scribble. Cottage on a moor, with Matt and Charter found a fam. Thanks, Match. I have to admit, your letters are a lot more readable than mine, even to my eyes, and not only account of I can't see as clear as I used to. It's my turn at the pen now, but I might need you to take over again afore this story's told. You'll do it? You're a magnific friend. After reading Matt's scribble, and knowing what I now knew, I headed back toward the habitat as fast as I could. Before I was halfway thith, headache and dizziness came on me something terrible. Prester had told Mary ago if I kept scribbling, headaches would get worse. Didn't take long. Don't know how I even made it to the habitat. Matt met me at the door like she'd known I was coming, took me to the healing room and ordered me not to talk till she said I could. She sang, and it gave me something to focus on in the midst of the muddiest head I'd ever had. When Lullaby finally drowned out Muddy Head rather than vice versa, I slept. When I woke, Matt was still with me. I told her about cousin being in the cave, and that he wanted her to know he was sorry. Her eyes brimmed over with a bit of brining. There was no need for him to tell me that. I've known it for at least as long as you've been alive. I wondered why she would put it that way, but thought best not to question it. I did ask her, though, if it didn't make her feel worrisome at all to know that he was living at the very entrance of Blue Flower. I did ask her, though, if it didn't make her feel worrisome at all to know that he was living at the very entrance of Blue Flower. I said that, sorry or not, I didn't feel comforted by the idea of him being so close. Matt smiled and said, No, it doesn't worry me. He can't come out. and he wouldn't anyway. Only place he can go is up to the Sancti Mount. I wish I could help him get thith, but it's not my task. Then I asked her if she'd tell me what happened after Charter was birthed, since that's with her Scribble had ended. My part in the telling is done for now. Pat is ready to tell you what comes next 7 years. I don't know if he'll tell you all or not. He may come to feel it's not his task any more, or that he's not up to it. If Pat can't tell you all, go to your brother Conifer. He knows the rest as well as we do. He knows about yours and Prester's birth. But Con was only 3 when Twin and I were born. Can he really memorial, or could he really crip what was happening? He memorials his Elsewhere story, doesn't he? But in any case, Conifer's seen it all in the stars. He's got my gift that way. He's most like me of any of my boys, except I never could get him to agree to learn letters, she grinned. I grinned back. Neither could I. Next evening I went into the room with our family meets by the fire. No one was there but Pat. I think he and Matt had planned it that way. Pat has a deliberate, thoughtful way of talking that I think comes from those lonely years as a flood watcher, when he didn't need to talk much. I get the feeling that afore those years he might have been quicker-tongued than it was good for him. It took him a couple of long fire sits that night and the next to tell what I'm scribbling now. He'd speak a bit, then stop to take a sip of his fermented grain, speak a bit more, then stop to play a phrase on his flute, speak a bit more, and look into the fire for a while. This was for the best. It gave me time to scribble what he took, word for word, without having to ask him to pause. And I didn't want to leave anything out. At first he seemed happy in memorialing, even if he wasn't comfortable with telling. As the telling went on, anxiousness and even pain came more and more into his face, and I felt like a misery me to let him go on. But I knew he had to, for his own sake as much as mine. The rest of this scribble is in his voice. The night Matt was sent to me, I had just come in from watching, when the bell of the Lady's Tower, not that I knew what it was then, and I could only dimly glimpse it from my side of the Stoneflood, the bell started ringing louder than usual, and it rang longer. I'd wondered at the sound of it since first hearing of it. I knew it was a bell, but I didn't know why it rang. This time it wailed so that I couldn't hear myself playing of my flute, and I couldn't hardly even hear my own thoughts, and the lizard that was my companion in the Moor cottage, like your match, only wingless and with cooler breath, was running around and up and over me like his tail had been set alight. The bell wailed till I began to hear it not as a bell any longer, but as a voice, and suddenly I knew it was calling to me. I went out to the banks of the flood ford and peered across. Stars were brighter than usual, but I felt more than saw that something was moving other side of the ford, though it might only be shadows. I stopped off the bank and a few steps into the flood, and kept peering, and soon I was sure that it was more substance than a trick of light. To my knowing, none of the flood watchers had ever gone more than halfway across the ford, if they'd ever gone that far. I went halfway, and still I couldn't tell what it was, but it seemed that it might be some injured beast struggling on the ground, and I thought of the Hart I had slain. And when I thought of him, Bell suddenly went silent, but I could still hear a wailing. It was a woman. There was never any thought that I shouldn't go to her aid, whether it was forbidden to all the way cross the flood or no, and you know what I found on t'other side. You know how fair your Mat is, but I couldn't see that then for the pain in her face. And I saw that she was laboring with a child, and was alone without help, and was like to go elsewhere if she was left so. But her pain would have been enough for me without that. I bent down to her and lifted her and the child into my arms, and turned back toward the cottage side of the flood. I didn't know whether I ought to take her thith, or whether she'd wish to go, but there's not even a wild critter, still less a human, stirring other side of the flood, and none with a heart could have done anything else. As soon as I started carrying her back, the bell started ringing again, not so loud and fierce now, and no longer like it was wailing. Rather, it sounded as if it was rejoicing. I could tell it was her first birthing, and she was fearful as well as in pain. I'd never helped at a birth, but I'd seen it done. I'd say it seemed the longest night of my life, but there was one 7 years after that seemed longer, the night Prester and you were born. And that one didn't seem so account of there being 2 of you, but I'm not telling that now. Comes to that, you might have to hear it from other lips than mine. But the night ended at last with your brother Charter in the arms of Mat's arms, who was looking at me tiredly but gratefully, and not the least bit afraid, though she didn't know me, and I didn't trouble her by talking without need. She didn't seem inclined to talk then either, but when I began playing for her the tune that you know as the Lullaby, she looked at me in wonder and said, "How—" Then her face settled into a perfect restfulness, and she said no more, but nursed the child and fell back to sleep. We talked a lot between then and the year later, when Charter took to his feet. At first it was hard for me to find my voice. The grandfam never came to me for news any more, and now that Matt and Charter were with me, I didn't feel inclined to seek the grandfam out to tell them anything. I knew something not likely to be pleasing would happen if they learned a woman with child had crossed from the other side of the flood. I didn't think they were cruel enough to do her or the child bodily harm, unless they'd grown more cruel in my years of watching. But I knew they'd expect them to be taken into the grandfam and put to tasks they didn't choose like the rest of us, and forget where they came from, and losing their names, and I wasn't going to let that happen to anyone that wasn't born to it if I could prevent it. Matt and I talked, and she told me her name, which is yours, and I told her my name, first one I'd ever told. She told me her story, and I told her mine. She seemed fairer in my eyes every day, but I had no thought of doing anything but caring for her and being as good a father-like friend to her child as I could. The fear she'd brought with her came back strong at times, but it grew less and less, until it was clear to me that she wasn't just being brave in forgetting it, but had come to be happy and at peace. I didn't know how long we could keep living so, whether always, or whether someone might come from across the flood, or whether my own grandfam that very day. She taught me the verse, and she sang wordlessly along with my flute, and her voice was more beautiful an instrument than anything fashioned by man. She fashioned meals alongside me, and fashioned wearing things alongside me. And at nights when Charter was asleep, she'd watch the flood alongside me. She told me the names of all the stars she knew, and the brightest of them to me seemed the stars that bore hers and Charter's names. For a year our days and nights passed so, and neither of us thought to gaze too far into the future. We weren't looking for what came to find us. One night, just after Charter first walked, he was tucked into bed, and your Matt and I were headed to death too. As we turned from our last watch of the flood ford, the bell of Prester's tower, I'll call it that from now on, for so it became, started ringing. This was no common ringing, as it hadn't been the night I found Matt. That had been a wailing. This was like a mix of weeping and screaming and a fall of doom. Fall is what Matt did, to her knees and gazed back across the flood. I could see shadowy motion and bursts of light at a distance, but Matt, as is her gift, if it could be called that at such a time, saw it all. She started keening along with the bell, and ripping her white wearing cloth and digging with her fingers in the mud by the flood banks, and smearing it on her face. Seems an elsewhere thing now that Charter could have slept through it, for I can't imagine anything within hearing not cripping that the sanctity ones above were crying out in anger and sorrow. All gone, Matt gasped. All the strong taken for the crooked town. All the fair taken for the castle twisted. All the rest, all the rest. All the habitat that mirrored the star maps burnt to the ground, with the weak and the sick and the old and the youngest and the less fair still in them. All gone, gone but for charred bones. All the rest, nurse. It was the last word Matt managed before fainting dead away. I carried her into the cottage as I had the night Charter was born. All I could do was watch over her and hope that she'd wake in her right mind, or even wake at all. What she'd told, through her I too saw a tithe of it, pride child images, like the worst things a heart could dream and not crack wider than the flood, wider than the sea, wider than all the world. I saw only a tithe of what she saw, and I wondered that the stars didn't fall to earth to stop such things from ever happening again. I tried to bear it, account of Matt couldn't, and at last neither could I. My face fell against her shoulder, like I was her child or a wedded one sleeping thith. Charter woke the both of us with the dawn. I didn't dream, and the not dreaming was worse than if I'd dreamt over and over again the horror I'd seen. It was a nothing swallowing up everything, poisoning it so it could never escape again. And as you're a dreamer, you'll crip what I mean. Matt was stronger than I was. She took up Charter and began nursing him and singing the lullaby. I couldn't speak, and the only thing she said to me till that day was worn into night again was that she'd dreamt of a black horseman riding to and fro through the ruined habitat, then around the sanctity fount in Prester's tower, and at last pausing by the flood ford before spurring his horse toward the northeast mountains, with all those that had been spared had been taken. It was the elder Charter, and he was seeking for her, for his cousin specially. I asked whether she thought what had happened to her grandfam was in any way his doing. She said it was her greatest grief that she couldn't tell. Next day she said we must warn my own grandfam. I wanted to argue against her, account of the risk it would be to her and Charter, but I knew it would be more pride child than the wrong we'd seen done to us to keep silence. So leaving her in charter in the Moor cottage, I set out for the Grand Fam's habitat. I didn't know what I should say to the Fam, but Matt told me I'd know when the time came. As I drew to the halfway point between cottage and habitat, I wondered that I saw and heard no signs of the Grand Fam going about their tasks. Critters they kept that were usually closest watched were wandering about loose with no one to mind them. There were no sounds of hammering, nor of the bells that call the Grand Fam from one task to the next. I got to the habitat proper and still heard no sound, and saw no one but a few younglings running wild without supervision, and this was not usual either. With dread greater than I had come with, which was great enough, I walked through the habitat center and on past the last particular habitat, which stood the Grand Fam's gathering hall. A few of the Grand Fam were huddled about the door as account of there being no room for them, but the Grand Fam isn't big, and I crept that most of them were inside. I entered. Those assembled thith were stonily silent with dread worse than mine, and at the end of the hall on a dais I saw the elders in their seats, and they too seemed turned to stone. I jostled my way through the Grand Fam, them not resisting, until I stood in a bare space before the seat of the first elder. I recognized him as the one who had been the second elder years agone when I had last stood in this place. The new first elder was aged, but there was now more than age bowing him down, holding him bound like water turned ice by sudden cold. A low murmur ran among the Grand Fam, and this roused him. He lifted his downcast head and saw me. I expected a challenge, a call to arms from the elder's guards, since I had drawn so near without leave. There were no guards. There was no challenge. The first elder said in a voice like lead, "I memorial your face, but I don't memorial your task. Speak. What are you?" "I am the only flood watcher," I told him. "I've come with tidings from across the flood." Flood watcher. Paused as though he'd said all that was needful. Then at last, "I'd forgotten that there was a watcher thith. We've not heard from you in many a year." "Nor have you sent for me," I countered. "No," he answered slowly. "We'd come to think tidings from the other side were no longer of use, until this morning wise." He seemed too tired to go on. To one side of him sat a man of about my age, more noble to look than most among the Grand Fam. "Let me, father," he said. Then to me, "I am the second elder, son of the first elder. What tidings do you bring us?" I wondered how he could be an elder so young. "I've come to warn you that the Grand Fam, other side of the flood, have been captived or killed by those living on the mountains north," I told him. I expected a stir of surprise, followed by panic. There was none. "We know these tidings," he answered. "We heard them this morning wise." The first elder held up his hand. "No, I am the first elder. I must speak now, weary as I am. A black horseman came crying through the habitat just as we were beginning to wake. This is what he cried. 'By order of the castle and the town it rules first among its possessions, I bring tidings that the Grand Fam on the flood's western side has met the fate of those who refuse to pay us tribute. Some of you may memorial enough of your old history to know what that fate is. I give you warning that your own Grand Fam may not follow after. The castle will have tribute. It has not yet been set, but another crier will be sent to you afore many moons have gone. Use that time to think what you will spare. My cry is ended. And so you see us gathered together to speak of what each of us can spare. We find that we cannot speak one word." His breath was coming short. He tugged at his son's cloak and whispered in his ear. "My father asked," said the second elder, "how you who were not Hith knows this news. He says his memorial that the habitat other side of the flood is too far from the Moor cottage for you to have seen what you tell of. He wants to know whether any of that Grand Fam approached the ford to bring messages." Before I answer, I said, "Will you tell me why the elders no longer keep guards with weapons about them?" "Do we need them now?" asked the second elder quickly. "Not from fear of me," I assured him. "But if the tribute sent down is not tolerable, do you have any power to resist?" "Even had we those weapons," he said, "there is not strength among us to put them to good use. But we have not the weapons." Not long after my father became first elder, a crier came from the castle, saying that as peace had long been declared between themselves and us, we needed our weapons no longer. He told us that the castle would take it as a sign of our good faith if we would make a bonfire of them afore the next feast of the burying of ashes, so that at that feast we might bury the weapon ashes along with the rest. We assembled Hith to fashion answer, even as we have today. Many of us, of the Grand Fam, said we should not comply, but the greater part said yes. Some accounted they imagined the peace would last forever, and some out of fear of what the castle would do if we did not show the good faith they demanded, for it was clear that it was a demand. Those who urged complying, as well as those who urged against it, knew equally that the crier had brought no message of peace, but a threat. You will find things much changed, Whith, during your 10 years as flood watcher. The elders were sometimes wont to rule by sternness and sometimes force, but my father is not of that mettle. He wishes to know the mind of his people. Those that can choose their own tasks now, and do them for as long as they are able. There are still rules regarding childbearing, but that is to ensure that we have enough, for we are not a prosperous people, and those who break those rules are judged less harshly than they were once. So on this question of the weapons, my father let the people choose. He gave no sign of what decision he would have made if he had taken it upon himself, for he wanted them to decide freely. The weapons were burned at the next bonfire, and buried shortly after. And now I have answered your question, maybe you will keep faith with us in kind, and tell us how this news from across the flood came to you. In good faith I had to tell him what I would rather not. There was a woman of the grandfam across the flood, a seer. For reasons which with your pardon I cannot speak of, she sought refuge with me. She has been with me for a year. She came heavy with child, a son, and he is just walking. 2 nights ago she saw what I have told you, and she sent me to warn you. The first elder raised his head with a look of wonder, and it seemed to me new hope. There is a seer this side of the flood? Our grandfam is in need of one. We don't scorn seeing of that kind as we used. And now that we are visited again in other than peace by the castle, we could afford no such scorn even if we felt it. Would this woman agree to be a seer to us, as she was to those on the other side? Permit me to go back to my cottage and speak with her, I said. I will bring her answer to you, and herself if she will come. She brings her own answer, and herself with it, cried a clear voice from the back of the hall. I had had to push my way through the grandfam. They parted to either side for your mat, as though she was a queen, and so she was. I had known she was fair, but never afore now. She was new washed, and her white wearing cloth, though rent in her grief, was now washed too. Her red hair held state upon her shoulders, as if in triumph, and her blue eyes shone with the same. She held your brother Charter in her arms. Charter is dark like our grandfam, but no one this side of the flood has ever seen anyone with her coloring, and it felt as new to me now as when I'd seen her first. She came to a stand next to me, before the first elder. He gazed at her in awe, seeming unable to speak. She spoke in his stead. First elder, forgive my discourtesy in appearing before you with rents in my wearing cloth. I rent it myself in anguish over the fate of my grandfam, and I have no other cloth or grandfam. The first elder bowed his head. Lady, he said, it well becomes you. The grandfam had indeed changed. When I was among them, none bowed before any but the elders. The women among them were never addressed as lady. I'm not sure they ever had been until now. Lady, said the first elder again, you are welcome among our grandfam, if you will have us. And if you will, we ask you to be our seer, as you have been of those afore us. I rend my own cloak in honor of your grandfam that is lost. He did so, and his son and many others among the people did likewise. Mat bowed her head in turn. First elder, if you will take me and my son and this flood watcher who saved me under your sure protection, threatening us with no harm but what you yourself are threatened with, I will be your seer. We will likely be more in need of your protection than you ours, he answered ruefully. Nevertheless, I and my grandfam do so swear. A voice I had not yet heard came from the dais, from the side of the first elder, with the son was not seated. I could tell from the garb of the speaker that he was the third elder. There was something in his face that made me uneasy, and when he spoke, his voice did the same. I saw that his cloak was untorn. First elder, he said, rather boldly, I thought, even memorialing that the first elder had given his people more freedom. May I be permitted to observe that our grandfam is in sore need of new blood to strengthen us? This woman, as well as being our seer, might make a strong wife. A nurse might be found to ensure that her son is not too great a burden. Mat clasped Charter slightly closer to her, but otherwise did not stir. I knew what the stillness in her face meant. You are rather over-hasty, third elder, said the first elder, frowning a little. We do not know yet whether this lady is free or willing to be courted. Pardon me, first elder. The third elder bowed his head with ceremony and no reverence. I thought we might be permitted to inquire. Mat's face grew even stiller. I knew that I could not let this stillness grow any longer. It was more heart-rending than any scream. I stepped behind her, and cast my cloak about her and Charter, my cloak which I myself had rent 2 nights afore. She is not free, I declared. I take her and this child to myself in the long accustomed manner of our grandfam. She is not free. She and the child are under my cloak. Now it was the turn of the third elder to grow very still, but there was a twitching at the corners of his mouth. He bowed his head to me and answered, "As you have said," but his eyes bowed not at all. The face of the first elder suddenly brightened. "And as is the long custom of our grandfam, tonight is the feast of the burying of ashes. We had forgot it in our fear of the crying, and if we had memorialed, we might not have felt we had much cause to celebrate. Now we have cause indeed. A seer has come to us. And you, flood watcher," he said, with a ghost of a smile as though at one long agone, "may have a cause as well. My people and I will make ready for the feast. But the second elder, my son, will take you and your wife to the cottage of the new wedded." The first elder rose and motioned the grandfam to follow him out. I steeled myself not to look at the third elder as he passed by, but saw with the tail of my eye that he was looking at Mat. At last only the second elder and Mat and Charter and I remained. The second elder led us out of the gathering hall to a small particular habitat a little apart from the rest. He opened its door and beckoned us inside. "Not as fine a place, lady, as I would guess you have been used to," he apologized, "but the finest this grandfam has to offer. You and this man will abide hith for 3 days before joining the rest of the grandfam to take up your tasks. 2 days is the custom for new weds, but we do not reckon the feast of the burying of ashes among our other days. And if you will permit, my sister is mother to a nursing child just the age of yours. She would be pleased to care for this one till those 3 days are done." It came to my mind now for the first time that though Charter had never seen a human soul but me and his Mat afore today, his face showed no fear. He had turned eager child eyes from one to another of the grandfam with a look that I couldn't explain to many, but you will creep account of you know your brother. He looked the same way, too loving for fear, at the second elder, and as though he knew what had been said, he held out his arms. The second elder smiled and took Charter from Mat. "Fairest boy I've seen," he said, "and his mother fairer still." Bearing your brother, he turned to leave us. But Mat said, "Second elder, as we are a part of the grandfam that celebrates it, ought not this man and I attend to the feast of the burying of ashes?" Again the second elder smiled. "You will not be expected. Kindle a new fire instead, you and Orion." I stared at him in wonder and asked, "How do you know my name?" "When your own Mat was wife of the first elder, I knew her well," he answered. "I'll tell you more of that, and of how she helped our grandfam to begin to be a real fam, another time. I will tell you now, as I think she would have wished, account of it seems fitting on your night of wedding. She was never a full wife to any man but your Pat. First elder as was then was not a patient man, nor a kind, yet somehow she contrived to make him afraid to touch her. But I must haste to the feast now, and take this lad with me." Bowing his head, he closed the door behind him. I turned to Mat. She reached out to me, but I forestalled her by stepping back a pace. "Especially," I said, "know now that you need never be a wife to me in anything but the eyes of the grandfam. I would rather preserve you as my friend than have any other woman, and I would rather be a father to Charter than any other child of my own body. I acted to defend you." At once I regretted the word, account of her cousin had used it. I swallowed and went on. "Have I done wrong?" She smiled. "You acted rightly, and I hope not only to defend me. Orion, know now that since the task of the Lady of the Tower was taken from me, the bell ringer has consoled me by giving me the next greatest thing, to be mother to your children. Our children will be strong, Orion, and they will not easily be taken from us or made untrue to themselves by the pride-child ones of the world. Do not fear to be a Pat to my Mat, for that is what we must now call one another. You did not do wrong. I am a seer, and I know what I say when I tell you that you will never do a better thing." Still I hesitated. These are poor lodgings for one who was to have been an unmated queen. The Moor cottage would be more suited to such a night. She took my hand. "If you could see it so, Pat, this is the Moor cottage. We will carry it with us whither we go." The sound of drumming and of chanting that accompanied the feast of the burying of ashes reached our ears, but all our hearts could hear was that melody we had shared the knowing of afore we met. I need not tell you, daughter specially, that what she called the Moor cottage that night became a Mat to me and I a Pat to her, not only in the eyes of the grandfam, but fully and in truth, and never was a truth so fair. 19th Scribble. Cave in the Wood, and an Undying Sentinel. Another eve, another Scribble match? I expect Pat's waiting for us by now. That last scribble about Matt and Pat coming together gave me a strange dream. You know I don't mean to be wed, but last night I dreamt I was wed, and that I'd birthed a child. But you know who that child was in the dream match? It was you. And when I saw that, I cast about me to find out who was the child's father. And this can't scan, I know, but I saw that was you, too. I hope you can crip what that means, account of I surely can't. All right, I know you think it was sweet of me to dream so of you, as if I could help it. But there is no need for you to stick your tongue so far into my ear as a benet. Fermented grain, scribble, flute, scribble, fire, scribble. And so I take down Pat's story again, right from Whith left off last time. During those 3 days in the cottage of the new wedded daughter, your Matt and I conceived your brother Fathom. You wonder how we could tell so close? Living among the grandfam, tasks and not much aloneness made it a rare thing for those wedded to come together bodily. The grandfam had grown accustomed to that. Also, account of in the stricter days they had to worry so much after the first child whether the second would be of the same sex, in which case they might be scorned. They got used to living grimly, and had only just started to think amidst their new freedom that life might contrive to be fair in some other way than being even. But more were conceived during that year after Matt became their seer than many a year afore. They were still under the threat of a tribute they didn't know, but Matt helped them to see past that. She taught them how to make their food go further, not just account of encouraging them to be more sparing, but she taught them to make it taste better than any food our grandfam had ever had, and so it better satisfied their hearts. They had no means of weaving, but she taught them to fash what they did wear more comfortable and durable, and sometimes even to add a little color. She taught them some melodies beyond their chance, especially the lullaby, and she taught them to do the bit of scribbling they did in a quicker, clearer way, and she taught them the verse. She didn't tell them what it meant. She left them to see things in it for themselves, as it might be a Moor cottage or a town or a castle, a black horseman or boots made of ram hide, things they cripped something of. And the town and the castle and the horseman being in the verse helped the grandfam to dread those things less than they had. Matt advised me to instruct them in all the tasks I had the mastery of, and no one said to me now, "That can't scan." But they saw that it did, and they took more pleasure in their tasks since they could do them with less anxiousness. I even taught a few of them the craft of flute making. So Fathom came, and no message of tribute came. And I think it was long in coming, account of Matt's very presence among the grandfam was a benet to ward off pride-child things. But there were other influences at work among grandfams than Matt's. Something was amiss with Fathom soon as he was birthed. He was bodily strong enough, but he was sensitive to place in a way most infants aren't. He wouldn't nurse out of doors unless it was under the shade of trees that blocked out the openness. Soon, even indoors, he wouldn't nurse in a particular habitat that faced north. Thankfully, Matt's and mine's didn't. But Matt was concerned. She couldn't say what the matter was, except this: Fathom can see something I don't. But came the next feast of the burying of ashes 1 year after Matt and I were wed. The people were free to leave off their tasks that day if they would, but some of them chose to help celebrate the day by working extra at a task they especially loved. Early that morning I passed by a boy of about 12 who was squaring corners for a new particular habitat. "Which square of corners are you?" I asked. "First," he said, beaming, "though I'm so young. Account of I'm the best. I can't quite get along with this squaring tool I've been given, though. Seems to me it's not quite square itself. I'll have to fash another." And then came the horseman with the cry we'd begun to hope we might never hear. "By order of the castle and the town it rules first among its possessions, I herewith declare your tribute. Those who rule fifth have not made this reckoning lightly, hence the delay in sending to you. Your tribute shall be 4 and 7 of every beast, crop, and other material thing you have or shall fash." He paused in the habitat center. At once protesting voices arose among the grandfam. 4 and 7 of everything? That's more than half. We cannot live so, they pleaded. The crier held up a hand to silence them. "There is another tribute you may choose instead, if the one I have declared is not tolerable to you. Your tribute may be reduced to 2 and 7. Sounds of relief broke out. He held up his hand again. "If you also send to the castle 1 and 3 of your persons." Dead silence fell. The crier himself broke it. "The choice is yours, which, since the first elder has given you such freedom, you may come to in common assembly. I will return tomorrow for your answer." And off he rode like a wind whose foulness was certain not to disperse afore blowing back. Still in silence, without being summoned, the Grand Fam proceeded slowly toward the gathering hall, Mat and Charter and Fathom and I with them. The three elders took their place on the dais. When they were seated, the first elder spoke. He among them all had most rejoiced to have the weight of the tribute lifted for a while, and he of all of them most felt it redescending now. "In past times of decision," he said, "I, as elder, have refrained from giving my thought, so as not to influence you as though I were in any way above you, instead of it being one who rules in the name of you all. That precedence I now break. Do not consent to be led, or let your children be led into slavery. The seer among us can teach us how to make do with 3 and 7 of what we have." There was a murmur of assent among some of the Grand Fam, but the greater part kept sullen quietness. It was clear to all how it would go. "What are children to us?" said one. "What, even in our own lives, if we must agree to be in such want that we may starve?" And to that was a murmur of greater assent than to the words of the first elder. The third elder now beckoned for leave to speak. "Our people have made their will plain. As the first elder has said, we rule in the name of the whole Grand Fam. We may not rule without it, or contrary to it." The second elder had remained silent all this time. Now he asked the first elder his father's permission to address the people. "And how will you choose who among you are to be given up? How will you come to a majority mind on that score?" "We might cast lots, so that none of us has an unfair advantage," said one. "We might take one out of each bloodline to make the tribute even," said another. "We might send those least capable of fulfilling their tasks away, and depend only upon our own work without others depending on us," some suggested. And at last a harsh voice that seemed to belong to none of the fam said, "We might go back to the old ways of not forgiving any who break the rule of one male to every female. We might send as tribute those who have already broken it." Those few who had broken it drew their children closer to them. Then after a pause came the cry, "We might send away those who are not truly of us." For a moment none could speak. "And who," asked the first elder after recovering himself, "would that be?" "That woman," said the one who had cried, pointing to Mat, "and her 2 children, indeed 2 boys, with her." Mat was valued among the Grand Fam, and this was too much for most of them. "If it comes to that," objected another, "third elder should send away the woman of the castle town that he's keeping." "Is this true, third elder?" inquired the first elder sternly. "Have you taken a wife from among those not among us without consulting the Grand Fam?" The third elder sneered. "Not a wife, first elder. She's been had by others, and I can't tell how long she will please me. But if our people wish to consider her among their other possible objects of tribute, hith she is." Out of a hidden corner not far from the dais stepped a figure gray-cloaked like one of the Grand Fam. "Well, woman," ordered the third elder, "unshroud yourself, and let all hith see what they may choose to cast away." The woman obeyed. The Grand Fam were too stunned even to gasp. Thith stood the most beautiful woman any of them had laid hands on. Even your Mat paled in comparison of her. She had waving black hair nearly to her feet. Her eyes were a bright green color we had never seen, and beneath the cloak that still partly covered her she wore purple. You will crep by this description, daughter, that she was the very forerunning likeness of your sister Pennydance, and her name too was Pennydance, for she'd been taken from among Mat's Grand Fam, but we did not know that till later. "Why so mute, people of the first and second elders, and least of all myself?" asked the third elder with mock humility. "Say now, shall this one be among the third that given is tribute? If so, so be it. I will not mourn, and I expect neither will she, for I fear that she has taken no great fancy to me." Mat, leaving Fathom with me, put her arm around the other woman's shoulder. It was apparent in the woman's face that she recognized their kinship at once. "I am hith under protection and by your sufferance. If I were a man among you, I would do for her the same." She looked at each man in turn. None stirred, till her eyes met those of the second elder. He rose, and joined with Mat at the woman's other side. "I cast my cloak about this woman," he said. "I take her under my protection, if she accepts it. But I nor any other will take her to wife against her will, nor to concubine ever again. If you choose to send her from you in the tribute number, you choose to send me as well." The Grand Fam as a whole had the wisdom to begin to be ashamed, but one among them murmured, "This is all very well and fair, but we must still decide by morning-wise whom the ones in 3 will be." And then it seemed that the Grand Fam was torn in twain, and there could be no deciding even to decide. Some began to wonder if they should reconsider giving in tribute the 4 and 7 of things, and none of their persons after all. The first elder rose. "My people," he said, "I will do my part in sparing you some of the choice you are so loath to make. I am old and have little strength left, and I have no other wisdom to deal with this hour than to choose to resign the first eldership to the son who has offered himself for this stranger. I will be the first one of the 3. The Grand Fam will celebrate the feast in unity tonight, and I at least shall depart with the crier come morning-wise." He said no other word, but looked about the hall for a last time at the faces of those assembled thith. Then occurred what an hour ago would have seemed impossible. 1 and 3 hith, 1 and 3 thith, some old, some bold among the young, some too ill or too frail to do their tasks, some who had lost their mates, some not yet mated, said that they would of their own accord go with the first elder, so that none should be taken away unwilling, and none that remained should fear to starve or overly grieve. Following the first elder, those others who had volunteered themselves departed for the feast. Following the first elder, those others who had volunteered themselves departed for the feast, and after them the remainder of the Grand Fam, till there were left only myself holding fathom, Matt, the second elder, and the grey-eyed woman. Matt looked into those eyes gently. "Will you permit me to take you to the cottage of the new wedded? You need not fear the first elder. Excepting only my husband, he is the best of men." The woman smiled faintly but thankfully, and Matt led her away. He who had been the second elder, and was now the first, grasped my hand. "Wish me joy, Orion, 1 year to the day after your own joy. I joy to have saved this woman, though the loss of my father is hard to me, and my heart forebodes that this matter of the tribute will not end so easily. By the choice I have made, I may never have a true wife nor child of my own, but I am not sorry. I will be in the cottage of the new wedded when my father and the others go to the crier, and for 2 days more. Give them my benet in my stead." 3 days after, he returned to the Grand Fam and assumed his place as the first elder. Matt took the woman of both her Grand Fams under her wing. The first elder bade me call his first council. Before I left him to do so, I grasped his hand as he had mine 3 nights agone. "Is it well, first elder?" I asked. He smiled. "Your wife is indeed a seer, Orion. It is well." The first elder and his wife did not conceive during their time in the cottage of the new wedded, but about 3 months later, and that was one of the few good things that came between the feast of the burying of the ashes and next, unless they were the goods of the hearts that not even Matt could see. The Grand Fam, so relieved to have been spared the choosing of them, began to miss those that had chosen to go. Truth is, they had been among the best of the Grand Fam, else they would not have made the sacrifice. It was hard to see that the required number would do the same next year. So the best of the Grand Fam began searching their consciences as to how a just choice should be made, and the worst of them began plotting whom among them might be sent off by force, and food and other goods became scarce. Matt believes, and I with her, that the Grand Fam was far less content with the 5 and 7 things they'd kept than if they'd chosen the 3 and 7 while keeping their people. The choice the fam had made in fear, as such choices always will, made their fear greater. They were less and less willing to heed the counsel of Matt and myself and the first elder. Some began to cast evil looks upon the first elder's wife, especially as it grew plain that she was with child. They whispered among themselves that as they had refrained from conceiving in consideration of the next tribute, the first elder ought to have done the same. Those who had more children of one sex than another began to be scorned, and given short rations by those tasked with the serving. At first a few, then more than a few, having conceived without meaning it, rid themselves of their children before they should be born, a thing never practiced among the Grand Fam in their known history, unsanctity in the eyes of any people they had the knowing of, except it were those of the castle. The verse was now little memorialed among them, and when it was, it brought no comfort but dread. Account of though the verse had not changed, they had. Excepting the first elder, who, in the midst of his wedded happiness, was yet weighted with burden, they strove not to think what might befall when it pleased the castle to renew its demands of tribute. Some began to wonder if it would not be safest to offer the entire Grand Fam to the castle's mercy and consent to be so ruled. And it was the belief of the first elder, with whom I had many a talk in friendship regarding my own Matt and many things else, that he who was now become the second elder was encouraging the people to think this. They knew he must have influence with the castle from the way he had acquired his former concubine, now the first elder's wife. They were foolish enough to think that he meant them well. Night afore the next feast of the burying of ashes, the first elder's wife went into labor. This was her first birthing, and Matt was concerned that she was not strong, though the first elder gave up much of his rations for her and his child she carried. Though she was happy with the first elder, the abuse she had suffered afore coming to him had taken something from her that his love could not restore. Matt and Charter and the first elder were with his laboring wife, and I was trying to calm Fathom, who had grown more and more fearful over the year that had passed, when the next crier came. It seemed to me that his horse had gone half mad with having to bear that rider, and that the rider was no more human but a creature unnaturally nurtured on poison. By order of the castle and the town it rules first among its possessions. I herewith announce your tribute. 4 in every 7 of all you possess. Some brave soul dared to stop him before he had done. 4 in 7 if we give you none of our persons, but 2 in 7 if we give you 1 in 3 persons. The Grand Fam laughed nervously and thanked the speaker in their hearts. No, said the crier, very quietly, so that the rest must go quiet in order to hear him. No, he said again, louder this time. The tribute is 4 in 7 regardless of your persons. The tribute of persons is now 2 in 3. Do not tell the castle, as afore, that you cannot live so, for you have been given a year to learn. Do not tell the castle that you cannot survive as a people while keeping only 1 person in 3. Think rather of how you will keep those 1 in 3 strong, so that they, at least, might survive, if not thrive. But once again you are given a choice. You may keep the tribute of 1 in 3 of your persons, if you increase the tribute of your goods to 6 in 7. That is no choice. None said this above a whisper, but their answer was not to be mistaken. Grand Fam, I took it upon myself to say in the absence of the first elder, it is a choice. With the help of the seer and the first elder and your own courage, you may choose the 1 in 7. Think, if you had had the courage to choose the 4 in 7 last year and given none of yourselves up, you might be facing an easier choice now. A few murmured approval at my words, but very few. No, if we had chosen so last year, the choice would now have been worse. The castle would have punished us. The choice would have been worse. How could it have been worse? The voice that asked seemed to be deadened as by a weight of earth. We have given them what they wanted, and yet they are not satisfied. Never will they be. Better to starve with honor than to give more of ourselves up. For is it not plain that the castle will have all of us in the end? The crier looked at this prophet with utter hatred, and many among the Grand Fam did the same. Turning his horse's head about, the crier cast his eyes back over his shoulder. I will return for your answer tomorrow. You may assemble yourselves as is your way, and decide what that will be. The Grand Fam slouched toward the gathering hall. They could do nothing thith but argue among themselves until the first elder joined them. Midday passed, and still the first elder did not come. They grew more and more anxious in waiting. They besought the second elder to take the first elder's authority upon himself. This he would not do. He sat alone on the dais, for no new third elder had been willing to take his old place. He watched the Grand Fam's growing discontent, and though nothing more than a slight movement crossed his face, it seemed to me that he rejoiced. Not till it was growing dusk and time to prepare for the feast did the first elder arrive. Matt was not with him, and I wondered whether his wife was still laboring or if the child had come. But the instant I saw his face, I knew at least the brunt of what had passed. It took no seer to read the pale anguish that no one, not even the second elder, dared to speak before that look. At last he himself spoke, and his voice was thick with what none could have mistaken for wrath. You need not tell me the news of the crier. I have heard. Neither need you debate before me what your choice will be, for I will have no part of it. You have brought ruin on the Grand Fam with no help from the castle, and there is nothing left for me to do but to see the course you have charted run to its end. For myself, I have already given up my 2 in 3. My wife, Pennydance, yes, she had a name, and our daughter, whom she named Mariago, afore the 2 of them went elsewhere, have paid part of your forfeit. This man, he said, looking keenly at me, has chosen to pay the next part by sacrificing 2 of his own 3, the seer not included, for I tell you that she may not be. He and his youngest boy, who is sickly, will go to the mountains without waiting for the rest of you to decide one another's fate. From this night I am the first elder in name only. Depart for the feast. This man and his child in arms, and I will not go with you. I go rather to bury my dead. Such was the power in that voice that had given over all power. The Grand Fam, none excepted, obeyed him without a word. At last he and Fathom and I were left alone. At last the tears he had been holding in began to flow. Forgive me, Orion, for not consulting you afore speaking, he said haltingly. I had other matters to think of. Neither you nor the child shall go to the castle, and I trusted that your trust of me was enough to know this. There is a place with you and he may hide, a place that is well guarded by one whom I think you have met. Your wife shall visit you at night to nurse this child and comfort you, and you her. And I for a while shall keep the boy Charter with me to comfort me. And I say to you, not as your elder, but as your friend, that in the time you and your wife have together, you should not fear to conceive. You and yours will be what are left when the rest of the grand fam is no more. A seer I may not be, but this I do see. Then he went on to tell me of a secret cave in the eastern wood, and the one who stood sentinel thith. I could but gaze at him in wonder when he described an ancient heart with a slow bleeding at its breast. It was the same I had pierced with my spear all those years ago, and still it had not died, and it had caught him at unawares in the wood once, and he too had pierced it, and still it did not die. It was dying in truth, but it might go on dying forever and still remain. With such a guardian, my fam and I need have no fear of the year and more to come. I cannot tell you how it fared with the grand fam during that year, how they managed or did not in their 3 and 7, how they chose or forced their will upon the 2 and 3. Matt would not speak of it in our nights together, maybe account of nothing I could imagine could be more grievous than the truth. The first elder took Matt and Charter into his particular habitat, since he could no longer trust the grand fam to honor their seer. Some few among them came of their own accord to him and to her for counsel, but neither had much to give. The first elder's spirit had died with his wife and child, and the very stars she had followed the map of seemed to Matt to have gone dark. Yet she knew that they shone still, and still had voices to speak, whether she could hear them now or no. I can tell you that during that year I made the cave in the wood as home-like a refuge as I might. From the outside it looked scarcely like a place to lay one's head, but inside it was nigh as spacious as the Moor cottage had been, and bigger than our particular habitat among the grand fam. This was good, for we were 4, soon to be 5. About 3 months into that year, on one of Matt's night visits after she'd nursed Fathom and he'd fallen asleep, we conceived again, as the first elder had bidden us. We did this not so much for ourselves, for we saw our future as being very uncertain, as for those we had lost. We lived in that cave and thrived thith for 3 years, and 2/3 into them we conceived again, and Matt soon knew that this time she was bearing 2. But that I'm not going to tell of. I'll tell till the night Conifer was born, and then I am done. Matt and Charter held on to the grand fam under the first elder's protection. Fathom and I, with the help of the Hart, fashioned the cave into a place of comfort and even beauty, and a place of plenty as well. While the grand fam warred and starved, the Hart helped us find food and other things we could never otherwise have come upon. And Fathom, though he was only toddling then, found yet more on his own, deep things, as is his gift. He found things in the wood that were hidden from other eyes, and he found things in the recesses of the cave. Once we had retreated out of sight of the mountains, he began to be secure, and he and the Hart became closer to one another than I could be to either of them. The Hart, I hardly know how to speak of him. Maybe you'll see him yourself one day, daughter. He'd grown much larger than I had memorialed. When he lay before the cave, none wandering thith could have seen past him to the cave's entrance, nor could any without some bit of elsewhere sight discern the Hart himself. Not that any did wander that way, except once on the night of Conifer's birth. Not long afore the next feast of the Bearing of Ashes, one dusk when Fathom had fallen asleep atop the Hart's back, clutching the coarse white fur with his small hands, and I was waiting for Matt, she and Charter came to bide with us for good. Her being with child had become impossible to hide, and the first elder had sent her and Charter away not only for their safety, so that they should not be with the grand fam at the castle's next announcement of tribute. None seemed to notice their going, unless it was the second elder, and he had enough to keep the grand fam from eating each other and himself alive. So the first elder resigned his last consolation back to me and waited for the end. Matt, through no wish of her own, saw through the eyes of the Hart what that end was. Arrived the dawn of the feast of the Bearing of Ashes. The grand fam had not slept for fear of the crier whose doom they expected morning-wise. When the doom came, it was not on any direct route from the castle. The second elder, on a black horse none had known him to possess, cantered into the habitat center. What was left of the grand fam gathered about him. By order of the castle and the town, it rules first among its possessions. I herewith announce your tribute. It was no cry of news, for they had known it in their hearts already a year agone. The grand fam and all it possesses is forfeit, but nothing it possesses is any longer of worth. As in the 2 years past, however, you are given a choice. Those of you who choose not to go to the castle but remain hith will be burnt in your particular habitats, and there will be no more feasts, nor any left to bury your ashes. Your habitat, including your gathering hall and the cottage of the new wedded on which you have so relied, will be ashes afore this night is through, with or without you." The first elder replied in a voice of command a year unheard from him. "My people will not be burnt in their habitats, as none that are sanctity have ever done willingly. We will go to the castle. I will go foremost, and my people, not your people, second elder, for you are undeserving of them, and have indeed plotted their ruin. My people will follow me. We will go now, and you may raise at your leisure our habitat and our gathering hall with its dais on which you were never worthy to sit. I can but hope that my people and I have seen the last of you." With these words he started slowly but staunchly towards the mountains, and one by one the grand fam followed in his strength. But the second elder was left alone to contemplate why the triumph he had so long anticipated tasted sour in his mouth. Matt and I have never learned what fate befell the first elder and the rest of the grand fam, but we expect they met it long ago, and we pray that most of them, with the first elder's help, met it well. That night the second elder burnt the habitat. That night your Matt gave birth to your brother Conifer. I could tell that she was struggling to hold him in till the habitat fires had died, but I told her, "Let the child go. Not all fires are evil. Some there are that make things clean." So came Conifer, with hair like flame and understanding of the fires of even the stars. After the fires waned, we heard hoofs approach the entrance of the cave, and paused thith afore going on. It was Matt's cousin, still searching for his specialty. Matt could hear in his horse's heavy sound that more was amiss with him than the missing of her. Your brother that was born that night will tell you of what followed. You may stay by this fire a while with me, daughter, if you will, but you must forgive me if I am silent now among my memorials. And so Pat ended, but I can't quite end. I hear you yawning, Match, but will you forgive me if I scribble one bit more? My head aches so, my eyes are bleary, but I must put down what I feel of loss since the start of Pat's story. Matt's grandfam, all gone. Pat's grandfam, all gone. It's been a comfort to me since I've known of them to think some might still be thith, even if it's a place I can never go. And the story isn't ended. I must still seek out Con and learn the rest from him. What more may be lost and gone when he has told me? Will the goneness ever be done? After hearing it, will I be unlost enough to scribble it?
20th Scribble. Something Scarlet. I've got to follow back. I'm doing what I did with Mariago's scribble, a mossy gathering. I think I've got a good reason this time. This was to be what I thought was my last scribble, the one about Presters and my birth, the kind of I've already scribbled everything after that. Con did just what I expected of him, took me out to look at the bell ringer's stars above the Sancti Mount while he told his part of the tale. No light to scribble by, and anyway, Con has a quick way of speaking, so there was no thought of taking down what he said word for word, like with Pat. I knew I'd have to memorial it as exactly as I could and recall it in my own voice, and that's what I'm doing. But something happened right after he'd finished that caused me to wait a while, and this scribble will scan better if I tell that first. Or maybe it won't. In any case, I can't tell the other yet. When Con had finished what he'd told, all I could do at first was to look at him. Whatever I'd been expecting to hear, it wasn't that. I'd always assumed that Prester had died at birth in a natural way, though Matt and Pat never said so exactly. I'd assumed that if it was otherwise, they'd have told me otherwise. Now I could see why they waited. It was harder to hear than anything I've heard yet, not just account of Prester, but, well, that'll come out when I'm ready, if ever I am. So I looked at Con, and looked, and I felt like brining, and I couldn't. I felt like fainting, and I couldn't. But I had at some point to do something, account of he was looking back at me as anxious as I had ever seen him. I felt like I needed to comfort him somehow. At least, I said, I've got the picture in my head of Prester's tower still standing under its stars. The Sancti fount may have dried up, but Prester's tower still stands. I waited for Con to give me a bit of a smile in return. All he did was look at me more solemn. Prester's tower still stands, I insisted. Still no word from Con. Something died in my heart without that word spoken. At last Con said, and I thought he might be going to brine, when the bell ringer's servants, Big Match and Big Bear, purified the Northlands both sides of the flood, you memorial I was at the top of Prester's tower with Browl when it was happening, and he flew me back to the fam when the bell started ringing too hard to be endured up close. It didn't stop ringing. It rang and rang, louder and wilder. but purer and purer in tone until it cracked, and the last note it rang shattered the stones of Prester's tower. Now I was brining. I knew it was not likely I'd ever be able to go with Thith, but my fondest wish has always been to sleep under those stars. I thought if there's any sleeping place that can give me the last bit of peace I can't find aloft with the sibs, Thith was it. And now I can't even hope for it. And I can't dream of it any more, now that I know there's no hope. Matt's Lady Tower, gone. Prester's Tower, gone. Con put his arms around me. Especially, he said gently, listen to yourself. You talk as if the tower had been Matt. It wasn't. You talk as if the tower had been Prester. It wasn't. My brining stopped up on a sudden. No, I said in a voice that expressed no comfort, a kind of I didn't feel any. No, it wasn't Matt, and it wasn't Prester. But I'm beginning to feel like the tower was me. And with that, Muddyhead took me down like the bell had taken down the tower. Catch me, Con. I'm going to faint, I whispered. And I did. When folks come to themselves after a faint, it's common for them to say, "Whith am I?" I knew right whith I was. I was in the healing room. Muddyhead was clean gone, the gonest it's ever been since it started, as far as the headaches and dizziness went. But I felt so weak I didn't think I could lift a finger, and when I spoke it was like I was struggling to make myself heard from under deep water, and I still couldn't see well. I knew I was in the healing room by the soft green glow around me. I squinted a little and saw that Matt was Thith, and Con beside her. "Why my hith?" I asked. "You started the bleed, specially," said Con. "Sudden. There's a trail of your blood leading from the Sancti Mount to the habitat. I brought you hith as fast as I could." "Matt," I said, and I felt like braying again, but it was all dried up. "Prester's tower is gone." Her eyes welled with the tears I didn't have. "Con told me that you knew." One by one, other members of the fam came closer to my bed with I could see them. It didn't occur to me then to wonder why they were all Thith. "Pat, Prester's tower is gone. The memorial of it, and Matt and you and your brother Thith will never be. Charter, Prester's tower is gone. But my love for you can't be shattered. Fathom, Prester's tower is gone. I can still see it. It takes more faith than you have just yet. Penny Dance, Prester's tower is gone. I know, especially. I'm sorry. Carry Wish, Prester's tower is gone. How can it be gone when I'm carrying it? Fondest, Prester's tower is gone. Big Matt says your eyes need washing. Rightful, Prester's tower is gone. Big Bear says some oil might help. Meriago, Prester's tower is gone. You'll be surprised at not only who, but what you will find at the bellringer's wedding. And then it did occur to me to think it was strange for all of them to be Thith. Matt, I said, something more is amiss than the tower's being gone, isn't it? Especially, as Con told you, you've started the bleed, but you're bleeding more than you should. I looked from one of them to another. I could see that they feared if it didn't staunch soon, I was going to go elsewhere, as Matt had almost gone. I wanted to comfort them all by saying I'd be fine in a bit, but I couldn't, even if I'd believed it. All I could say was, the bleeding's too much, account of it's Prester's blood as well as mine. It's the verses, something scarlet. I've got to follow back. I've always had to, and now there is no back. And with that I fell asleep with the hot tears of Match himself running down my cheek. 21st Scribble. Black Horseman, who made Prester fly, and Blue Flower, Whith we flew. I appreciate the offer, Match, but I think I have just strength and eyesight to scribble this last bit. If there's one among all these scribbles I need to do myself, it's this that the rest have been leading to. I'm scribbling from the healing room, and it's doubtful I'll ever leave it again. The bleed's slowed, so I'm not in danger of going elsewhere just yet, and I've regained enough use of my misery-me body that I can sit up in bed and wield a pen, like Matt did. When she was going elsewhere, I asked the bell ringer to take me instead. I wonder if this is his answer. Account of, though the bleed is slowed, it hasn't stopped, and I don't think it ever will. like the slow bleed in the heart's breast. Don't think I can keep on dying and dying forever like he can, though. He's got sanctity blood. Mine's nothing special, just mine. And Prester's. Well, maybe the Prester part is special. It is to me, anyway. And so I tell the last of the story that Con told me. After the fire on the night of Conifer's birth, there seemed no human life at all east side of the Stoneflood except our fam in the cave. There never was a sign of any light or movement in the mountains north. Even the horses seemed to have stopped running, under the Hart's protection, which they didn't seem to need, and maybe they didn't seem to need it, account of they already had it. Pat and Matt, with as much help as Charter and Fathom could give, gradually buried all the ashes left from the burning of Pat's grandfam. Matt wore Con strapped against her as she worked, and strange to say, that is his first memorial. So you can see why the task of burying Blueflower's ashes is so portentous to him. 2 years and more into the cave time, Matt started carrying Prester and me. One night, not too long before we were due to be birthed, Matt told Pat she knew that the fam should go. She said she didn't know Whith yet, except we should do it other side of the flood, account of it was further from the castle. She said she wanted to see the Sancti Fount and the Lady Tower one more time, and, if it was possible, that our fam should bury the ashes of her grandfam, if any remained. She said she thought we should follow the Starflood south, though she couldn't tell whither it would lead us. She said that she was sure that if we didn't leave the cave before the two she was carrying came, we never would. She said that the fam's Pat needed to decide, account of she couldn't tell what her powers as a seer were worth any more. She thought they might have all gone into her mothering instead. Pat had had no thought of leaving, and he didn't want to think of it now. If Matt hadn't laid the burden of deciding on him, he felt he might have had a clearer head. But she had, and he knew that it was his burden and no one else's. If the fam stayed, the Hart would keep them safe, that he knew. If they went, they knew not whith, they might be going into danger, and he knew that, too. But he knew also that if safety had been the deciding factor, he might never have rescued Matt when she was birthing Charter. He and Matt would never have gone to warn his grandfam. He would never have taken Matt to wife. The first elder would never have taken his penny dance to wife. To keep some things safe, it was needful to take on other dangers, and he saw that not wanting to was what led to the ruinating of the grandfam. But still he couldn't bear to decide alone. He needed the fam's benet. He already knew Matt's mind. He couldn't know the minds of us she carried, but he had to assumpt that counted as 3 for going. He asked Charter whether he wanted to go, and Charter said he couldn't want anything but what Pat wanted. Account of being Pat's backup was his task. He tried to ask Con, but all Con ever wanted to do was go, whatever it might be, so he couldn't be said to have an opinion. Pat hesitated to ask Fathom. He asked Matt whether she thought on how going might be for Fathom. Fathom had never been happy till they'd come to the cave in the wood, and he loved it the best of any of the fam. Matt said she had thought on it, but it would be no good to Fathom in the long run if he was not allowed to think on it himself. Pat asked Fathom, and Fathom's face got all pale and anxious. He was remembering his fear in the side of the mountains, but he said, "Can I be with the Hart tonight? I'd like to sleep on the Hart's back, and he likes me to do it." Pat, of course, gave his consent. His own thought was that this was Fathom's way of saying going was the last thing he wanted. But come morning-wise, before any of the rest of the fam were awake, Fathom came over to the cave and woke them up. When they'd got all the morning dew out of their heads, he said in a tone that sounded nothing like that of a child of 5, "The fam needs to have faith. Hart says so. Takes no faith to stay hith. We need to have faith. I'm sorry, Pat, but it's what Hart said, and I know it's true. What's more, he'll go with us till we get to the other side of the flood, and turn south, and even then he'll not leave till Matt's birth. Account of it's too far to go for her being so close to bearing too, she must ride on him. He wouldn't say what he'd be after that, but he said that we are likely to find friends as good as he when we cross over. So in the end it was Fathom that settled it, and he's had a way of doing that ever since." And Fathom ran ahead the morning wise after, when the fam departed, taking with them needful things that they could carry, and a few that weren't strictly needful, like the most magnificent rock Fathom had found in all the fam's time in the cave. Matt and Prester and I rode on the Hart's back, and its pace was gentle enough for us, but also quick enough that we made it to the ford flood a little afore dusk. Matt and Pat took a last wistful look at the Moor cottage, but they didn't go in. It had fallen into sad disrepair the past 6 years with no one thith to tend it. But who should scamper out? They wondered how it could have lived so long, but Pat's and later Matt's old friend the lizard. He ran up the Hart's back and up Matt's and perched himself on her left shoulder, and so he made the crossing with us. When the flood had been crossed, the fam looked once more eastward, out of respect for those that had been lost, then turned their faces to those who had been lost longer agone. To their amazement, there were no remains of Matt's grandfam or the particular habitats or anything belonging to them. Someone had toiled long in the earth not far west of the sancty fount, and buried them all, and had left a white wearing cloth, now tattered, attached to a spear to mark the place. So there was no labor left for the fam to do. Their only question was whether they should turn south that night or the next. The Sibs were tired but brave, and so was Matt, but she wanted to say her goodbye to the Lady Tower briefly before they moved on. They all bathed in the sancty fount, and the Hart drank from it. Pat, leaving the Sibs in keeping of the Hart, helped Matt up the stairs of the tower. Matt asked his Benet to rest Whith alone for a bit, perhaps for the night, but it need not be so long if she had a little sleep first. Pat, with a feeling of reverence for what she ought to have been in this her own place, and with the peaceful sound of the bell swaying slightly breezeward in his ears, went down the stairs again and stepped over the threshold into the glowing light of the sancty fount and the stars. His hand froze on the handle of the door before he could close it. Hart was crouched thith, with Charter, Fathom, and Conifer crouched in fear behind him. Pat had to step around them to see what they had seen. A black horseman, his approaching hoof sounds having been masked by the tower's bell, was just dismounting. Pat thought the horseman couldn't see the Sibs behind the Hart, but Pat knew himself could be seen right enough. The horseman's face was haggard, as though he was half-starved in body and nearly full-starved at heart. He held out a weaponless hand in token of peace. Pat didn't need the counsel of the Hart or the eyes of the seer to know that it was Matt's cousin. "With this specially?" the cousin asked. Pat made no sign nor said a word. He could only wait. "With this specially?" the cousin repeated with greater urgency. "Is she safe? I'm hith to make sure of it." Pat felt his mistrust melt into wonder. Later he wondered that he hadn't hesitated longer. Perhaps he had sensed that there was no time. "She's in the Lady Tower," he answered. "She may be safe thith for a little," said the cousin, "but there's not much time. I've come to warn you. You and she and your fam need to flee quickly. Those up thith," with his head he indicated the northeast mountains, "are getting desperate. They've run out of food. They're starting to eat each other, not even waiting till those they eat are dead. And some of them, the most pride-child of them, can smell living blood from even this far away." "My wife," said Pat, "is heavy with child, twins. Though we have planned to go south for our own reasons, you will crip that we cannot go quickly. But you, her cousin, I thought that I was one of them?" The cousin smiled wryly. "I tried to be for a time. None that had ever known my cousin could have borne it for long. In the end I was little better than their slave. But I still have my horse, and I sneak away when I can to spy things out and set things right. I have no weapon any more, in case you fear it. Could never bear to wield one again after what I've seen. But we talked too long. Could you fetch specially the lady, your wife, and leave with all your fam? If my horse would be of any aid to you in hastening, take him. Or if you can't handle him, I can see you along for a while. I know that I can't come with you." "We have another ride," Pat told him, "but he can't carry all of us. I know nothing of horses." "The Hart yonder, guarding the three boys?" "No, large as he is, I can see he couldn't carry you all," the cousin answered. "You can see him?" said Pat, in the greatest wonder yet. "Specially tried to give me something of her gift of seeing, and I didn't want it. Now I have the curse of seeing more than I want. The eldest boy," the cousin's voice shook, "is he the one I abandoned?" Pat nodded. "Bless the bell ringer, he looks like cousin and not me." And Pat thought this strange, account of the younger Charter was an almost exact likeness of what the elder had been afore he'd been ravaged. "How long is it till birth, do you know?" the cousin continued. "Can you journey a few days at least from Whith afore then?" "We don't know exact," said Pat, "but we think—" Just then Matt's voice quelled out from the tower, clearly in pain. Then Pat and cousin as well guessed that the time was now. "Can I go to her?" cousin asked. "Can I help her as I wasn't thith to help with my own son? Will you stay Whith and help guard my son as I never did, since you have been such a good Pat to him, since you have been such a good husband especially?" Pat thought what kind of extra pain it would cause Matt was she so suddenly to see her cousin. "I might ask her, if she's calm enough, but she and those coming are more pretentious than the amends you want to make." Then another cry came from the tower. This time it was, "Cousin!" "You see," said cousin, laying his gaunt hand on Pat's arm, "she's expecting me. Stay Whith and comfort the rest of her children." Pat, feeling like he was in the midst of something more impossible than any dream, waited below, while the elder Charter went up into the tower. It didn't seem long till the latter came down again with a new child in his arm. "A boy," he said, and his face glowed as if it was his own. "She says his name is Prester. I've got this to swaddle him in, soon as he is washed." He held up a white wearing-cloth. "I've kept her color about me all these years. Perhaps that was what saved me." "Then it was you," Pat said, indicating the white cloth marking the burying place of the grandfam. "What else could I have done?" answered the cousin. "I owed them that. I had no hand in what was done to them. But my loose tongue when I first went to the castle was what alerted those thith to the presence of a fam west side of the flood. So meaning it or no, all their blood is on me. Your wife thinks it may be a bit afore the next child comes. The time worries me. She asked me to ask you if you would give your Benet for me to wash this one in the sancty fount. If you give it me, you should stay with the Hart by the other children until I bring him back. And I'll stay hith and guard him and these others, while you help her to bring forth the twin. Then you should all fly south as swift as you can. I'll help in any way I may, but even if I could, I wouldn't go with you. That would be too good for the likes of me." The sancty fount was hard by, and lighting up all the sky around the Lady Tower. While Pat and the Sibs and the Hart himself looked on, Cousin washed Prester and dried him with his cloak, and swaddled him in white. Then he, with Prester in his arms, turned back toward the tower. The cousin's horse the while had been snuffing up the wind and pacing uneasily. Now he turned his head northeast and cried, in words, for we all heard him, and even I have a vague memory of it from the womb. "Charter, where?" From across the flood north of the tower galloped 4 horsemen, cloaked in black and hooded. The foremost of them held a spear at rest. He drove it into the cousin's horse's breast. The horse fell, lay twitching briefly, and was still. Pat and the 3 eldest Sibs were hidden behind the Hart, but there was no hiding Prester and cousin. The light from the sancty fount showed them as clearly as if it was the sun's. The foremost rider threw the hood back from his head. Pat knew him at once for he who had been the second elder, now the only elder, and the elder of no one. He had never been easy to look on, but now his heart had completely refashed his face in its image. Pat told the Sibs to shut their eyes. He himself cannot or will not describe that face to anyone, enough to know that he sees it at whiles in the worst of his dreams. The second elder looked at the elder Charter. "You," he said, "I might have known. And you have found what you came for? Something more tender than yourself as a tribute to the castle?" The elder Charter did not turn any paler than he was already. Rather, his face seemed to gain new color. For all its long sufferings, Pat saw it as the stark opposite of the second elder's face. "You will not have this child," the cousin said quietly. "You may have me, but you will not have this child." "Will not?" replied the second elder mockingly. "If not, how will you prevent us?" His voice was the voice of more than one. The other 3 horsemen were speaking through their master. "In your grandfam," said the cousin, "you have a custom of casting the cloak. These others with you may not acknowledge it. I know that you at least will not lightly turn it aside. If you do, I can promise you that it will consume you. I cast my cloak about this child. He is under my protection. I only wish that my cloak were not so rent and ruinated, and of a fairer color, but I have no other. I cast my cloak about the son of the seer of both the grandfams you have slain." And Pat saw that the second elder hesitated. None from among his grandfam could remember from Whith the custom of cloak casting had come, but they knew it was sancty. It seemed the second elder not only knew it too, but in the dark councils of the castle had even learned why. "Bring the boy out from under your cloak and give him to me." The voice trembled a little. The tower bell went suddenly silent. All the bell-ringer's stars faded, leaving no light but that of the sancty fount. "No," said the cousin. "This deed, if you do it, will be no one else's, mine the least of all. This child is innocent, and he is under protection of the sancty ones. His spilt blood will be your deed, and no one else's." From one of the horsemen a voice struggled upward, as if it was from the center of the earth. "Conquest," it moaned. "Famine," groaned the second. "War," intoned the third. A pause. Then, "Death," whispered the second elder. Charter, Fathom, and Conifer's eyes were still shut at Pat's command. Only Pat and the Hart saw the second elder ride slowly forward and thrust his spear clean through Prester and into the cousin's breast.
The Hart reared up, gave a cry of anguish, and blood poured new and fast from his long wound. The stars blazed out again suddenly, the specialty star coming into its place directly over the tower. The bell started ringing. Pat had heard it ring loudly at times of trouble afore, but this was a huger voice than one of warning. It was a voice of judgment. The Hart bore the brunt of the sound with his body. Even so, Pat thought his own ears might be so stricken as never to hear another sound plainly again. "Stop your ears with your fingers, sons," he said, brining the while, and he did the same. And so did the second elder and his servants, but they had no help from any sanctity one to shut that agony out. The 4 horses reared, cast their riders, and cast screaming off seaward. The second elder and his servants crawled along the ground on their knees and elbows, their fingers still in their ears. Soon blood was pouring from between the fingers, and from nostrils, and at last from mouths. They rolled upon their backs with their eyes facing the stars, and so in horror of a light they could not choose but see, that of one of the 7 sibs called Prester, death came for them. But the faces of the elder Charter and the child Prester were serene as those who sleep and dream well. When the bell had quieted to a solemn but tender dirge, Pat closed both their eyes. When the enemies of all that is sanctity had gone elsewhere, whatever for them that might be, Matt heard the bell ringing the lullaby, at once saddest and most joyful of songs. Pat ascended the tower stairs to her, leaving the sibs and Presters and the cousins' bodies in care of the Hart. He had no need to tell her what had happened below. She had seen it, but all her will was now engaged in bringing forth the second of the twins she'd carried. Before ever I'd left her body, the spirit of the one she'd borne afore me had fled. I've always imagined I was birthed at night, but that had been Prester. In fact, I was birthed just at morning-wise, but while the ringer stars still lingered. Matt told Pat to take me to be washed in the sanctity fount, as her cousin had washed Prester, and then to bring me back to her along with my dead twin. Fam rested that day, and duskward they set off, Matt and me, and Prester and cousin's body on Hart's back, Pat and Sibs walking, Charter going in front all, carrying his father's spear with its white cloth. We journeyed south all that day and most of the next, till we came in sight of the first of the southern rivers. The Hart saw all of us that were living safely across the fording place, but kept the 2 elsewhere ones still on his back. The fam looked north once more to see him, bleeding as always from his own breast. Then he turned west, and he and those he carried vanished seaward. That night Charter had his vision of the everything critter, and next morning-wise he, Fathom, Conifer, Pat, and Matt had their particular bewinged things. Next night, after crossing the second river south, Fathom had his vision of blue flower. Next night after the third river being crossed, Con rode on Browl, and then on Big Dog, and then on Browl again, and saw Big Match and Big Bear come down, and all the north lands purified by the work of the 2 of them. Con never saw Big Bear's work, but west side of the Starflood he saw even the sanctity fount itself taken up into Big Match's breath. After he joined the fam again, he saw through the eyes of Browl the falling of Prester's tower. But he didn't tell me that last till I pressed him, and he saw it couldn't be hidden. I've scribbled all the other loss I felt at this telling of Con's. Part of me wanted never to speak again, part of me wanted to shout why to the bell-ringer's stars. Only thing I managed was, "I don't understand, Con, why Big Match, by the will of the bell-ringer, would take the sanctity fount away. The sanctity fount was pure like Prester's tower. Ought it not to have been allowed to remain?" "Perhaps it's time thith was done, specially," said Con gently. "The sanctity fount may still spring up in any number of other places we know nothing about. Maybe it'll spring here in Blue Flower one day. Fact is, when I'm a-burying our ashes, sometimes I've thought I heard water running underground. And then I had my say about the comfort I had in Prester's tower still standing, and I heard what Con said back to me, and everything was drowned in my muddy head and blood."
22nd Scribble. Room hung in green. I can't stay, but what else? Muddy head and blood. That is the most poison-stink ending for a scribble anyone could think of. Can you help me fash a better one, Match? I could always end with the verse, as I ought to have begun. I think I understand it a bit better now. Only a bit, though. There'll be a star. No mystery this. The Bell Star. My name star. There'll be an unmated queen. That's a tower lady. Maybe all of them. And Matt, as ought to have been. There'll be a cottage on a moor. Yes, with Charter was born. There'll be a cave in a wood. With Con was born, and Prester and I were conceived. There'll be a black horseman. Ever since I've known the verse, I've been afraid of that horseman. After reading Matt's scribble, I thought it was the cousin. Maybe it was, but another black horseman killed Prester. The cousin, Charter, didn't turn out at all as I thought he would. I asked Matt, how can the cousin be living under the Sancti Mount when he's been elsewhere for 12 years agone? Matt said that maybe that's as elsewhere as he can manage to be right now. I've always thought I hated the one that begot Charter on Matt. Same one tried to save Prester. I'm sad that he can't get out of the cave. Doesn't he know that he's forgiven? Or has he still not forgiven himself? And a blue flower. With we live, clearly. Also Marigo's special bespringing thing, at whose feet we found her. And, I suppose, the morning dews, which I'm finally not burdened with the task of taming account if I can't do it any more. Now that I can't do it, I kind of miss those ornery things. There'll be something scarlet. Prester's blood. And mine. There'll be a room hung in green. With them scribbling this. Strange that the room hung in green that I'd always wondered about ends up being a place I've known all my life. There'll be a crooked town, and a castle twisted. I'll do those two the dishonor of throwing them together, and I want to know no more of them. There'll be a prisoner. Could be the cousin, but doesn't a prisoner have to be kept by someone? Can a person be their own imprisoner? Something I still don't crip about that. And a pair of ram-hide boots. Now I know that Pat's grandfam and Pat himself in the old days wore them, but I can't see anything specially portentous about that. There'll be a dying animal. Coming after the ram hide, I used to think the animal must be a ram that had given its hide to fash someone's boots. I'm glad we don't wear them, Whith. But now I wonder if the heart that's always dying and yet doesn't has something to do with it. There'll be a lullaby. Until I started this scribble, I never realized how portentous that lullaby is. Seems to be written in Sancti language somehow. Still don't know what it means. There'll be white wings. Last thing afore Prester's tower. None of our special bewinged things has them. Maybe they've got something to do with the wedding. Maybe the white cloaks everyone casteth are like wings. Not sure I'll ever crip that one. Account of, and only then, and then only, Prester's tower. But Prester's tower is gone. Unless they belong to time, no white wings can take me thith. That still breaks my heart, Match. I think that's what's really killing me, not the bleed. I told that to Matt, and you know what she said? You memorial especially, how Pat was ashamed to come together with me in the cottage of the new wedded. He wished we'd been in the Moor cottage instead, and I told him that if he could only see it, with we were was the Moor cottage. Especially the bell ringer's same stars shine over many more places than Prester's tower. For one, they shine over the Sancti Mount. If you could see it, maybe for you the Sancti Mount's side tree is Prester's tower. Maybe it is. If that's the case, Whith I've always wanted to go is Whith I've almost always been. Except I've never climbed the Sancti Mount and touched the side tree. None of us has. Oh, Match, can that be it? Can that be Whith I need to go? I don't see how that can scan. Even if I had the benet of the fam and the Sancti ones, I can hardly move and I can hardly see. I could ask someone in the fam to carry me, Con maybe, but I don't think that's his task. Match, can you help me fash a better ending to this scribble? Not by scribbling any more, but by doing something other than die in the healing room. You're awfully silent right now, but I know you've got the ear of the Sancti people. You're one of them yourself in a way, aren't you? Though I talk to you so familiar. If you can fash a better ending, you'll have to scribble it if it needs scribbling. If you do, scribble it as if it was in my own words. You have always known my heart afore I know it myself. Match! Match! You've taken over now, but are you getting this? How I ask Matt, and she calls a council of the fam, and how Matt says she ought to go, and Pat says she's not strong enough, she'll die on the way, and Penny Dent says she'll die if she stays, and Marigo says she'll have a ride, maybe more than one, and the twins say together, yes, she will, and we know who, and Carrywish says I'll be carrying her along with the rest, and Charter says she'll find friends to be help to her, and be helped by her along the way, and Fathom says in deep places as well as high. And Con says, the bell ringer's stars are calling her. And finally Pat says, I'll miss her more than I can tell. You're sure you're getting this, Match? I can see your tail moving about as mad as the morning dews and my hair combined. That's all I can see.
Probably you're scribbling on sancty parchment with invisible ink. You're telling how the fam takes me to the base of the sancty mount, me in Pat's arms, wearing a white cloth woven by Matt that refuses to take the stain of my bleed? How, when we get thith, Big Dog himself is waiting with his wing-like ears to carry me, and Pat puts me on his back? How each of the fam in turn gives me something to take on my climb? Pat, a tiny replica of Prester's tower bell fashioned by his own hands to wear on a chain around my neck. Matt gives me something like an egg, but less fragile. Says she found it floating in the air in the healing room when I was sleeping, like I once found the seed that sprang into Marigo's blue rose, and maybe even into Marigo herself. How Matt says to lay the egg at the foot of the side tree if it doesn't hatch sooner. How Charter gives me a pouch of healing herbs given him by a girl across the Star Twin with he and Pat were trading. I smell a wedding, don't you, Match? Charter says I'll know who to give them to when the time comes. How Fathom gives me his most magnific rock from the cave in the wood. How Con loans me, Browl to ride on my right shoulder, so while I climb I'll never fear the dark. How Pennydance gives me an old scribble of mine, and says I should read it when I can see again. How Carrywish gives me bread and wine. Fondest gives me water, and Rightful gives me oil in case I itch. How Marigo gives me something I can't see to read, but she says it's an invitation to the bellringer's wedding, come straight from the feast itself. You're scribbling how each of the fam kisses me as does each of their bewinged things, and they each lay a sprig of their special bespringing things on me. How, when they are just turning to leave for the habitat, the blue flower bell starts ringing, along with the little bell around my neck, and down from the sky comes Big Match, and lands on the west side of the Twin Rivers, and down comes Big Bear, and lands on the east side, and how Fondest and Rightful turn to each other in glee, and then back to the fam, and say, "You see?" And I do. I see Big Dog, Big Match, and Big Bear, though I can't see much of anything else. And you're telling me how I'm left alone at the base of the Sancti Mount with the three big ones, and Boreal Owl, and you, Match.
23rd Scribble. Crooked Town, Castle Twisted. Not the mountain I want to climb. So hith are the 6 of us, and nothing is happening. I had the morning dewy wish that Big Dog would start whirring those ears and get us to the top of the Sanctity Mount in no time. But somehow even I quipped that would be cheating. I am wondering, though, why Big Dog doesn't move forward just a little. I guess he can read my thoughts like you can, Match. He says, "Each of my brothers hith," indicating Big Match and Big Bear, "has something to show you before we go in." Go in, I say? We're going up, aren't we? Can't go up before going in. I start to feel nervous. Whith is in. Big Dog points his muzzle toward the cave. Whith rivers flow from. I don't like this at all. I don't think I'm up to actually meeting the cousin. Also, I don't take to deep, stuffy places like Fathom does. I contemplate whether to say this and sound like a coward for all the good it would do me. Account of the Sancti folk clearly crip the way better than I do. "Tell her what you want to show her, Big Match," says Big Dog. Big Match looks a little embarrassed, if you can imagine an embarrassed dragon. "My showing's not quite ready yet. I know you've been mourning for the Sancti fount, and you're a bit mad at me for breathing it all in, so I'm planning to breathe it out somewith you can see it again. I think it will be ready by the time Big Bear shows you what he's got to show. I think mine might come better after his anyway." "What is it you have to show me, Big Bear?" Now Big Bear starts looking, not embarrassed, but, well, not shy exactly either, but like he'd rather not answer. "You're not going to like it," he says. "But I do have to show you, you know." My heart is sinking fast, and I lose my temper some. "Then show me, and let's get it over with." "Thing is," explains Big Bear slowly, "you can't go up without going down first." "But Big Dog says I can't go up without going in first." "That too." "So I go down, and then in, and then up?" "True," hoots Boreal Owl. "But there's no width down to go that I can see. And then I memorial the below people. If I go down thith, I choke, they'll try to eat me. They'll smell my bleed." "Not the way I'm going to take you, they won't," says Big Bear. "What way is there except the crack in the cave? And I can't go in the cave yet." "Your sister Carrywish knows. Your brother Conifer fashed the way. And I memorial Carrywish putting bread into the bearing of ashes place, and the below people not spitting it back, but spitting back other things. They can't smell anything through ashes," Big Bear continues. "Hard enough to even breathe in the midst of those." "Then how are we going to?" I ask. "Or me, anyway. I suppose you don't need to breathe." One deep breath, and by time you have to let it out, I'll be through. Can't guarantee I won't sneeze once or twice, though. Ashes take my nose that way. I think, I start to gulp but end up sighing, that I'm still in the healing room and what I was expecting to be a good dream is turning into a bad one. Down, then in, then up. Right. Let's get it over with. There's no temper in the second get it over with. I'm cripping that temper is going to get me into nothing but trouble. Not sure I can help being afraid, though. Big Bear lumbers to me and I climb off Big Dog's back and onto his. Down, then up. Your friends coming with you? Asks Big Bear. Well, Browl, I ask. Go, he answers. Well, Match? I haven't had an ash bath since too long. I guess that answers that, Big Bear, I say. An ash bath it is. Make sure you tell me when to start holding my breath. Now would be good, says Big Bear. Account of we're standing with we need to start from, and we're sinking in a bit already. I'm thinking now would be a good time to do the 14, but slow, deep breaths can't exactly scan when you have to hold yours. Maybe I'll do them in my head. Good thing, account of at the word head, Big Bear plunges in nose first. Can't describe what ashes feel like when you're smothered in them. I thought they'd feel heavy, but they didn't. I thought they'd feel dirty, but they didn't. As Match said, it was almost like taking a bath, one where you're in constant danger of getting water up your nose. When I counted 14 in my head, I wasn't fool enough to open my mouth. We were through. So now we're through, but whith are we? In some kind of tunnel. I expect Big Bear and Match and Boreal Owl can see, but even if my eyes weren't bad, I wouldn't be able to. I hear things, though, even if they're not near, even if they're only echoes, voices. I can't make out what they're muttering, but I know whatever it is, it's the very opposite of the lullaby. Whoever these voices belong to, they've either never heard the lullaby or tried not to hear it for so long they finally got their wish. Hard to believe a bear can move so fast. Now we're going up. Now we're going out. And I don't need to ask whith we are. Even I can see it. Only one place in the world it could be. We're at the top of the mountain with the flood flows. No, not the top, account of there isn't any. I feel a splash of flood water droplets on me, taking the place of the ashes. If I'd known this was whith you were bringing me, I wouldn't have hesitated, I say to Big Bear. What made you think I wouldn't like it? I'm not afraid of heights once I'm on them. We're not thith yet, Big Bear mumbles. Not whith? Whith we're going. Big Bear, we're not going to what Prester's tower isn't anymore. I don't think I can bear not seeing it. But if you say I must. Wrong way that would be anyhow. We're headed east. And east and down Big Bear headed. Big Bear, my voice is shaking. You cleansed the mountains east after Prester went elsewhere, didn't you? So there's no more town or castle thith? They're not thith, but their ghosts linger. And that's what you've got to show me? Big Bear, I've been afraid of them all my life. That's why I've got to show you. Fear won't go away otherwise. Takes a while before I see anything. I thank the bell ringer it's not daytime, but as I do so, biggest moon I've ever looked on comes out. Something sickly about its light, in fact, but it shows up more than I want it to. Before us stands the crooked town, or leans the crooked town, or I'd always imagined them as had fashed it crooked on purpose. But I know enough from Pat about building to see that isn't so. Whoever fashed this tried to fashion it as perfectly square and straight as possible, but the ground below it wasn't stable, and it slipped, and afore Big Bear rid the world of it, it was lying on its side, and all the windows were doors, and all the doors led to crumbling earth, and all the roofs were walls. The side that was on top showed up brightest in the moonlight, and I saw them as had lived thith, had tried to add some beauty to the wreckage by hanging cloths of different colors to blow in what breezes came, if ever any did. There's no breeze now. The colors have faded till they're almost all the same. So the town people weren't all pride child. I should have known that, account of so many having been taken thith against their will. And when I think of that, and see those sad cloths, my eyes don't feel dry any more as they have been since we left the ashes. I close them, but that doesn't entirely stop them from brining. You can't see with your eyes closed, specially. Who said that? Match? No, not you, nor Browl, nor Big Bear. I feel like I know that voice, but I can't place it, and I'm of a good mind to ignore it. I've seen enough, haven't I? But what does enough mean? And then I realize it's been my own voice talking out loud. Big Bear has kept moving all this time. I open my eyes, and I see the castle twisted. The stairs wound in Prester's tower, Matt says. I always thought of them as a spiral. However they wound, it wasn't like this. Around and around from its huge base, upward and upward, narrower and narrower, till it reached what might be a last twist no bigger than an ingrown nail, if I could have seen it. And now I knew what seeing enough means. I've seen the most pride-child thing ever fashioned by man. Could you let me off your back for a minute, Big Bear? Match and Browl, you might want to take to the air for a bit. I feel sick. I am sick. I wash out my mouth with a little of fondest water. I climb onto Big Bear again. We can go back now, he says, but he doesn't. He goes toward a door in that twisted base, and the door is open. This isn't back, I object tremblingly. This is in. Same thing in this case, answers Big Bear. Tunnel we came through is only for coming. There's a different one for going. What do I say? There's nothing I can, and I know better than to think of shutting my eyes again. We're inside. I try not to look directly at anything, but even my bad eyes can't shut out the stains. Thank the ringer the smell of all that blood doesn't remain, or I'd be sick again. Even as it is, I'm so sick that I'm too sick to be sick. Been thinking since I started the bleed that for me it is a kind of curse. Don't think I knew what that word meant. I do now. There really is nothing hith to be seen but ever-darkening scarlet, except in one place. In the center of the floor is a square opening. Strange that it should be square in the midst of all this twisting, and a perfectly straight and smooth ramp slopes down from it, which after a few feet disappears into blackness. Big Bear's at the top of it, and I'm looking down, thinking before I'm at the bottom of that ramp the most awful thing possible will have happened, and then I think maybe it already has. We go down, Big Bear and Boreal Owl and Match and me, and before I can do the 14 there's nothing to be seen by me, or anything to be heard. Somehow the not hearing is worse than the not seeing. If Big Bear's heavy feet are making noise, if Browl's stirring a wing, if Match is getting all this down with his tail, I can't hear it. I can't hear my own 14 breaths. I can't hear the bell pat fash for me around my neck, and that's the worst, not hearing at all. But before we're at the bottom, I do hear something. It's not the most awful thing possible. It's the least probable. It's the sound of a woman brining, and all the tears ever shed are somehow in hers. Stop, Big Bear, I cry. You that I hear brining, can you hear me? Or are you a ghost? The brining lessens. The voice that answers may be the saddest I've heard, but it's also one of the fairest. I may be a ghost, it says, but I can hear you. Why are you brining? I'm brining for my son, my lost son. All the others have gone, but before I go, I need to see the place which I left him in case he might still be thith. I've tried to find it and tried, but in the dark I get turned around and keep coming back to whith I started. I can't tell which way is forward, so I'll never get any whith else. I've got friends with me that can help you find what you're looking for. Can we take her thith before we go back, Big Bear? I hear a gasp. Don't be afraid, I assure her. Big Bear won't hurt you. He's a sancty bear. Still a bear, though. Thank you, says Big Bear, pleased. Fact is, I know which she wants to go, and it's right on our way. The woman gropes her way to Big Bear and climbs on his back, behind me. She catches hold of me to steady herself, then moves her hands away quickly, as if she thinks I wouldn't want her touch. Put your arms around my waist if it makes you feel stronger, I say. I can use some more strength myself. Once off the ramp, Bear goes fast again, but not so fast as to scare her. Soon we see a light ahead and coming to an opening that's arched, and we're looking out of a cave at a night full of bright stars with nothing pride-child in their shining. And I know without being told that we've come west of the flood, and I'm looking out over the heathery land with my Mat's grandfam was. The woman climbs down from Big Bear. She is pale and thin in the starlight, but somehow radiant. She is an age to be of my Mat's Mat, and it occurs to me I've never seen anyone that old close up afore. She looks around a little just outside the mouth of the cave. He's not hith, she says sorrowfully, but not as sorrowfully as I would expect. Of course he can't be. It was nigh on 40 years ago. She turns her back to the three of us. As a child I was taken from somewith I don't memorial to the crooked town. I grew up fair, and those in the castle saw me and took me as their slave. I don't know how many men had me. I didn't want to count. They were all cruel, except one. Time came when I was with child and I didn't know whose. I hope it was his. He told me that once he'd wandered below the castle looking for a way out, and he'd come to this cave. He told me he'd help me to get Thith if he could when the child came, but in case he couldn't, he told me the way. He said that Thith the people were kind and would take care of the child and name him after one of the stars. He taught me their names for the 10 sanctiest ones. I asked him why he didn't go live among them himself. He said that he'd been to the castle too long. He said that seeing them from hiding was enough. He could never think of living with them. He said their habitat was too good for the likes of him, as he was too good for the likes of those over him in the castle. Before the child was born, he'd done something to displease them, and they killed him. I never heard how. So after I gave birth to my son, I memorialed what he'd told me of the way and came Whith without him. I hoped the child was his. Too good for the likes of him, I repeat in wonder. Too good for the likes of him. The child is his. I can't tell you how I know. We've got to keep moving. I know Whith your son is now, and we're going Thith as fast as Bear can carry us. She looks at me with equal wonder, but no doubt. Before Big Bear takes off again, I think to ask her, since you know the names of the Sancti stars, did you name your son? In your heart, I mean? You couldn't know what the others would name him. She smiles. Yes, she says. I named him in my heart. I named him Prester. Good thing Big Bear bolts like lightning right now, or I'd be falling off his back. Don't know how long the way south is compared to the way we came, but it doesn't seem long before I smell something I didn't smell on the outward trip. And I feel something falling on me like... Bear sneezes, and sends it back the way we just came a bit. Excuse me, seems the ash pit is collapsing and coming below. If it's not what it was, I'm not sure I know when to tell you to hold your breath. I'll try to crip it, though. And now we're all sneezes and coughs. Lizard coughs, and owl sneezes among them, and I wonder whether we'll choke before we get a chance to hold our breaths. And the ashes are falling thicker and quicker, and I think a minute more and we'll be buried. A minute doesn't come. Suddenly we aren't surrounded by ashes, but by water. Before we have time to fear we'll drown, faster than even Big Bear could swim, we burst up and out from below. Whith, the ash-bearing place was. Now a fountain is shooting skyward, and it's all alight, and we're standing in a shallow pool around it. First thing I see after the new Sancti fount is Big Match. He's grinning so wide that I think he's going to split himself from both sides of his mouth to the end of his tail. Can't blame him for sounding satisfied with himself when he says, I told you I'd be finished by the time you got hit.
24th Scribble. Prisoner, member of my fam, set free. I'm just about to give Big Match a kiss right on the mouth when a man appears at the entrance to the cave beneath the Sancti Mount. For some reason, in spite of my eyes, I can see him clear as I can the 3 big ones. He is so thin I can count his bones, and every line of his face says suffering. But I recognize him. He looks like my brother Charter. He looks like his own Matt that came south with us. He doesn't seem to see any of the 7 of us except Big Dog, who hasn't moved an inch since we left for the north, if that was any time at all ago. He looks about him worriedly, then says to Big Dog, the girl with the scarlet flower and the grain sheaf, she didn't come this morning wise. I answer him, I've come instead, and I've brought someone with me you'll be glad to meet. I put my arm around his mat, and she puts hers around me, and together we have just strength enough to walk the few feet to Whith he stands. Prester's Matt, I say, meet your son. He died trying to save my brother, Prester's, life. Others named him Charter, so you can add that to the name in your heart. Cousin Charter, meet your Matt. I don't know her name, but I know that she's a great lady. You might step out far enough to take her from me, I feel she's going to faint. For the first time since the cousin went into that cave, he takes a step outside. His Matt takes another step to meet him. They're holding each other and have only eyes each for each, so they don't see me brining. Show her your habitat and give her something to eat and drink if you have anything, I say to the cousin. Big Dog and Match and Boreal Owl and I will wait out Whith till you've had some time to yourself. And into the cave they go. I climb onto Big Dog's back again, and after brining for happiness and relief and exhaustion all in one, I fall asleep clutching those enormous ears. Didn't realize till now how soft they are. When I wake up, it's getting duskish, and Big Match and Big Bear are gone, probably off on some other task of the bell ringer. I expect I'll see them again eventually, but I already miss them. Cousin Matt steps out of the cave and says, "My son would like you and your friends to come in and share a meal with us." "Will Big Dog fit in, Thith?" I say doubtfully. She smiles and says, "Just about." So Big Dog and Match and Browl and I go in. Big Dog's tail is still outside the cave, which is just as well. Kind of that way he can wag it without hitting anyone. Cousin looks at me ashamedly. "All I have is cave moss and water. Sheaf of grain didn't come today, nor a flower to brighten the table with. Nor do I have a table to brighten either." I rummaged among the gifts the fam gave me. "I've got bread and wine and oil. You and your Matt can have as much as you like. Don't feel that hungry myself. And we might as well all enjoy my fam's particular bespringing things before they wither." Cousin Matt's eyes brighten, but Cousin looks troubled. "Don't think I could get the bread down, and surely not the wine. Might try a bit of the oil, though." He hands me a tiny cup, and I pour some in. Meanwhile, I give some of that as well as wine and bread to his Matt, but she waits for him to go first. He takes a sip, and some of the lines seem to go out of his face, and I think he may have a bone or two that I can't see now. "Try the bread," I say. I tear off a bit for him. He looks fearfully at it, puts it in his mouth, chews a couple of times, then spits it. Wrong word, kind of there's nothing contemptuous about it, back into his hand. His face has gone suddenly paler than afore he drank the oil. "You can try again a while later," I reassure him. Then I notice his Matt has taken some oil, but no bread or wine. "Can't you get it down either?" I ask her. I expect I could, but if my son can't eat it, neither will I. "You hear that, cousin? Your Matt's hungry, but she won't eat what you don't." He puts the piece he already chewed back into his mouth, chews a couple more times, and out again it comes. "It's no use. I can't," he retches. And then I memorial another of the fam's gifts to me. "I think I can help you mend that," I say. "Put these in the oil and dip the bread into that. These are healing herbs meant for you, given me by my brother Charter, your son. They were given him by the one he's going to marry." Cousin holds out his cup, and I put in a good pinch of herbs, after which I put a good pinch in his Matt's oil, after which there is only one pinch left. Cousin dips in the bread, puts it in his mouth, chews a time or two more, and swallows it. That is the first bread I've tasted in more years than I can count, and it's the best. So he and his Matt dip and eat, and after that I pour them some wine, and it goes down easy. I was afraid Cousin might start talking about blood when he saw it, but he doesn't. He does say, though, "You've got a wound that won't heal some with, don't you? Have you tried these herbs for it?" I shake my head. If I get to the top of the Sancti Mount without anyone else needing them, I might. But I need to save them till then, just in case. He looks at me in fearful wonder. "You're going up, Thith?" "Yes, I am. Same as you and your Matt are. You'll get to the top afore me, I'm sure. Even on Big Dog's back I dare not go too fast. I never thought to... But what happens after we get Thith?" "When you two get Thith, there'll be Sancti stairs to climb leading to the bell ringer's wedding feast. I won't know if there'll be Thith when I get Thith till I get Thith. I'll be glad enough to get to the top, but the Sancti stairs, they're too good for..." "The likes of you," I finish for him. "'Struth, they're too good for the likes of any of us. But your Matt won't go without you." "That I won't," she affirms with a bit of a flash in her eyes. Cousin looks from one to the other of us miserably. Another gift comes to mind. "What if I told you that I have an invitation to the wedding feast come straight from the bell ringer himself?" Now it's Cousin's eyes that are flashing with hope. "Does it have my name on it?" My eyes are too bad to read now, but I expect it's got everyone's name on it as wants to go. He's brining. He looks at his mother questioningly. "Take it, son," she says. He takes it, then looks back at me eagerly. "Would you mind if we started now? I know it's dark, but I've waited so long. The ringer's stars will light your way. Aren't you coming? I could use another rest, so I'll let you two get the start of me. But before you do, can you help me with something I've been wanting to crip? I don't know if your Matt is still hit in the same way I am, but I know you went elsewhere 12 years agone along with my brother. So why is it you're hit?" Cousin's face turns wistful. First thing I knew after waking from the spear thrust, I was lying among the ladyhair grasses near the western shore, with your Matt was found. Your brother was lying next to me, still sleeping, and his face seemed the most sancty I'd ever seen. Sanctier than even my cousin's, his Matt's. I sat up, and a lizard ran friendly-like up to my left shoulder and perched thith. There was a huge white Hart standing with his forehoofs in the waves, and he was watching for something. And pretty soon 2 small boats with no one to be seen guiding them appeared out of the sea mist and grounded themselves on the sand. "Put the child in one of the boats," the Hart said to me, and I wondered that I didn't wonder to hear him talk. I obeyed him. Then he told me to step into the other boat. I hesitated and asked him what those boats were going. He said, "Back to the land that's most sancty that's not yet among the stars, what your cousin came from." And he told me that boats leave from hith and thith all the time and come back empty when they're needed. But every once in a while they come back with one from across the water in them, and that's how your Matt came to us. I told him that I couldn't go thith. It was too good for the likes of me. I told him maybe I could go a slower way. Eventually I might feel I could get thith, but I couldn't bring myself to go direct. He said that all the waters that spring run thith at last, some quick, some slow. He said he could send me somewhat further off and let me go from thith. I thanked him and asked him to send me to the start of the slowest route possible. He nodded, and he asked the lizard whether he'd go with me or with the child. The lizard said he'd go with me. Hart pushed the child Prester's boat back offshore, and it moved west till it disappeared again into the sea mist. Hart looked at me very solemn but not sad, and for the first time I noticed he was bleeding from his breast. What I ought to have been bleeding from, but wasn't now. Blood scares me, you know. I've seen too much of it. So I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I was in this cave, and I've been hit ever since, and so was Lizard until not many moons ago. Then Lizard said he had to run quick to the top of Sancty Mount, and he wasn't sure how soon he'd be back. He's back now, I say. Match, you should have told me. Like my wings? Match said to the cousin. Cousin laughs outright, and it well becomes him. I expect he never did enough of it, even afore he turned pride child for a while. I give him and his mother most of the bread, wine, and oil that I have left, though I don't tell them so. Then I say, "So now you're both ready. What are you waiting for?" Apparently there's a stair that leads from inside the cave and out onto a lower level of the Sancty Mount. Cousin could have gone that way any time, but as long as he didn't believe he could, he couldn't. Before he and Matt start up the stairs, he turns to me one last time and says, "Thank you. Tell your Matt." "She already knows," I say. And then he and his Matt are gone. "I'm tired, Matt," I say. "Big dog, Browl, do you mind if I sleep hith a little?" They rough and hoot their assent. I drift off into dreams of boats of every shape and size, running down trickles of rain into streams, then into rivers, then into the sea and over it, and maybe after that up to the sancty places above. It doesn't occur to me till after I wake again to wonder what'll happen if I do find the stairs at the top of the Sancty Mount. I've given my wedding invitation away.
25th Scribble. Pair of ramhide boots in the ram's eye of Verriest vision. "Let's get going, big dog," I say when I've waked. "Or do I need to get to the outside somehow before I can ride you? These cave stairs look awfully narrow." "I may be big," he says, "but I can stretch so I'm longer and not so wide, which means I'll put my head right at the foot of the stairs, and you can hold tight to my back and ears if you prefer, and Match and Boreal Owl will hold tight to you. Then you might want to shut your eyes, so the going won't make you dizzy. Don't know whether it would have made me dizzy or not, if I'd been able to see more than a blur. Have you written, Match, that my hand in front of my own face is only a blur any more? But I can see big dog. He takes a big spring, and everything is a spinning swirl of color. The kind of these stairs wind, and there must be magnific rocks in this cave. And I just have time to wonder whether Fathom ever found these stairs, when Big Dog's head pops out at the top of them, and the rest of him springs up behind him, and he's his ordinary shape again, and it's night again on the Sancty Mount. I must have slept the whole last day through. I don't mind. Since I can't see much but shadows, traveling by night seems more comforting." "Hope that didn't tire you too much," says Big Dog. "We'll climb a ways, then I know the perfect place for you to rest again." So we climb in the midst of starlight, and I can start to smell the side tree. Bell Pat gave me for around my neck is ringing, maybe in sympathy with the one in blue flower, or maybe account of the Sancty stars are above us. I get the feeling this part of the climb is steep, and we're just clinging to the skin of the Sancty Mount.
Even if I could see down or up, I don't think I'd feel afraid. There's a tiredness so deep it drowns even the monsters of fear. I guess that's what some might call peace. I don't know what I call it, but my bleed has made it so I don't have strength to fight back against the ringer, if he's the one that has set this task for me. If I've set it for myself without him, well, I'm too tired to even think about that. We started turning what I think is mountainward, by which I mean I think the mountain itself is sloping gentler now, and there are some places that are fairly even, with one might lie without being half upright. And now we're walking amongst long, bespringing things, and their tips are all shiny in the starlight, and I run my hand along them and recognize them for the ladyhair grasses that grow on all shores. Do boats ever leave from the Sancti Mount, I wonder? And if so, whither do they go? I ask Big Dog if I can climb off him and sleep among the grasses a bit. He gives me his benet. They are so light, so gentle, I'm floating on the surface of a cloud. When I open my poor eyes, there's something right in front of my face that's not lady grasses. Those are pale, this is dark. Those are fragile, this is solid. I reach out to touch whatever it is and find that it's two things. Feels like the leather Pat trades for and fashes with. Feels like boots. Could they be ram's hide boots, gift from Orion, at your service? How do you do? Match, I'm on my way elsewhere, aren't I? You talking, Big Dog talking, Browl talking, that's one thing. But boots? I put my face closer to them in case I can manage to see something. What I see is eyes staring at me. 2 eyes to each. Left boot has 2 left eyes, and right boot has 2 right eyes. I wonder why 1 each isn't enough, and then I realize how morning dewy it is to try to make doxology out of anything when you've just been greeted by a pair of boots. Orion's boots, at your service, they say again. Orion's? Are you Pat's boots as was? Not that, Orion. Ah, my grandpat's boots. Of all the things I never thought I'd find on the Sancti Mount. What are you doing, Whith? Waiting for someone named Specially. Would you be she by any chance? Last 2 that came this way a bit ago had other names. Prester Charter, and the woman didn't have a name ready, but I called her Goodmother, and she seemed pleased with that. It's me you've been waiting for, I answer. But why? I've no need for boots, and I feel my way up them. You seem a fair sight too tall for me. You'd come all the way up my legs, you would. If I could walk much at all, it'd be hard to walk on you unless you're mighty bendable. Not bendable, but strong to hold you up. You don't need to walk in us. We'll do the walking for you. What do you want to walk? Wasn't thinking of anything but up the Sancti Mount. You don't need us for that. Think of a place other than Whith you'd most like to go to afore you finish your climb. Can't be above or below. Got to be on the surface like. Other than that, any width. I gave this a bit of thought, account of I believe every word they say. Why shouldn't I? If boots can talk at all, I expect they must be trusted. I'd like to see the half-Sancti land from whith Matt came and whith Prester went. The land with the boats go and from whith they come. But you can't take me thith. That we can. But it's over the sea. Did you hear us say we can't walk on water? Of course you can, I said wryly. But how am I going to get on? You're too high to step into. Boots lie down, spin around, and wriggle themselves on, starting at my feet and ending hip-wise. Then you said you weren't bendable. I could have helped you with that, interrupted Browl, disappointingly. I could have picked you up and dropped you in them. Sorry, Browl. Maybe you can lift me out of them when I get back. Wait Whith for me with Big Dog, won't you? He'll be glad of the company. Match, you'll have to come along. You're the one that's telling this story now, you know. So, Boots, just so I have some notion of what I'm in for, how fast do you go? Depends on whith we're going and who's wearing us. Our normal pace is 7 leagues at a stride. Oh my legs aren't that long. Only one of us needs to be on the surface at a time. We won't let you stumble. Maybe not, but it sounds like a poison stink uncomfortable way to travel to me, meaning no offense. None taken. It's a long way you want to go. Take our word you wouldn't want to go any slower. Gets cold at night on the open sea. Then I guess we'd best start. One thing, though. You can only go on the surface, but do you have to go now? That's not what I meant to say. I want to go now, but do I have to go to now? I wouldn't mind being with Matt and Prester were, only jumped back a bit. Or even forward. I don't know why. Just occurs to me somehow. Well now, that's a bit tricky.
Oh, we can take you out of time, but we can't say which when we'll land in. That kind of thing's not in our control. If I was expecting anything to be under anyone's control but the bell ringers, I would have stayed in the healing room and gone elsewhere from Whith. Brave lass, Orion would be proud. There's a pause and a noise I can't place. Then Boots said, "That first stride wasn't so much of a jolt, was it? So we're already off, and I didn't know. I expected clomp this way, clomp that way, back and forth, and my brain's rattling around my muddy head of hair. Instead, I'm pretty much stretched out on my stomach, and my stomach's on air, and the only thing that seems to be moving is the boots with my legs in them. It's almost like what I think swimming would be like if I'd ever done it, and it's perfectly smooth. I get the feeling Orion's boots are crossing the sea on tiptoe. When we're maybe halfway across, though, there is a bit of a bump. I'd almost fallen asleep, but that wakes me up right smart. What was that? I called down to the boots. Did we hit something? Only a sea monster. He reared up his head at an inopportune moment. That must have hurt. Him, I mean. I'm fine. Maybe the ringer thought he needed a kick in the head. These monsters sometimes get a little above themselves. I doze off again, and next thing I know, we're standing upright on a sandy shore. I can tell it's at least half sancty, account of some things are lighted up bright enough for even me to see. There's 2 rivers running from inland to seaward. They remind me of the blue flowers twins, except I can't see what these split from each other, and there are boats moored along both of them. Between them, and not far from the shore, are 2 things like cottages, except the fronts have no walls, or they're all doors, lying open to the sea breeze. The one to my left is surrounded at its foundation by what looks like a long golden beard. The one on my right is twined in a glory of golden head hair. The one on my left has letters over its door that say in, and the one on the right has letters that say out. I know I need to visit both of them, but I'm not sure what will happen if I go in a door marked out, so I go in the other one. There sits a man, the one the beard belongs to, and I can tell he's a king account of a crown-like thing fashioned of shells he's wearing on his head. He's looking through parchments, more parchments than I could count in a lifetime. Boat due to come in at the change of the tide. Noted. Boat due to come in just after morning-wise. Noted. The he notes me and says, "You don't appear to have come to stay. I think you want my twin sisters next door." Can I go in, Whith? Ah, I see your trouble. There's another door around the back. So I go out his back door and in through the queen's, his sister's. This twin's hair seems to cover everything in the cottage but her head and her hands. She too is looking through parchments, but not so many. She notes me and holds out the hand that's free. "Welcome, daughter. It's not often we get visitors from across the water that aren't going elsewhere. Come, sit on my lap. Don't be afraid." I sit a bit stiffly account of the boots, and I feel that I'm bathing in a sunlit pool, only it's hair rather than water. "Are you the king and queen?" I ask in shy wonder. "That my Mat saw once in the places above? I only ask account of your hair. She said it was like a whole world." "Yes, indeed. I memorial your Mat. Embarked from Whith to Blueflower 30 or more years ago. Yes, our habitat is above, but we enjoy getting away on other tasks, so Ringer has put us in charge of boats coming and going. Your Mat was in one that went. Not too many of those. The bell ringers' special ones, we call them." "Queen, lady, you say that my Mat embarked for Blueflower, but she didn't end up Whith. Leastways she did finally, but she didn't go direct. Took her more than 20 years to get Whith, I reckon. What happens once passengers get to the eastern shore is Hart's task, not mine. And he's the one that sends passengers across the sea Hithwards. Your Mat did get to Blueflower, though." "Yes." "That's all right, then. I've got another ready to go Whith now. This one says urgent, so I'm guessing it won't take any detours. But I'm a bit worried about its arriving safe, though." The Queen holds out something that I've seen afore, something I held in my hand 3 years agone. "Is it the same?" "Blue rose girl seed," explains the Queen. "Supposed to keep it moist, but it doesn't seem happy with the water Hithabouts. I'm afraid it might not live for the trip east." "It will live. It'll bloom into my sister Mariago." "We've gone back 3 years, Match." "I've got water with me that I know will keep it growing. A gift from another sister, Fondest. I brought it from across the sea. Put the seed in this water and direct it to Blueflower's healing room. It will be found. It will survive. It will thrive." Now it is the Queen's turn to look at me in wonder. Then she looks harder.
You're the twin of the one who came here 9 years back, aren't you? King and I thought that was the most beautiful boy we'd ever seen. We've seen him above since. Not such a boy any more, but still beautiful." "Prester," I whisper, and I sink my face into her hair and my crazy hair into her sane hair, and I sleep a while. When I wake, I say, "I think I've done what I came for. It's time I went back. But can I ask, not on my own account, but the sister who gave me this water, she's a longing to come hith. Does she have to wait for that until she goes elsewhere? You've brought us a great gift from her. She'll be welcome whenever she comes. And I've a brother that longs to come hith even more. I've brought you a gift from him." I rummage for Fathom's rock, hold it out to her, and it springs up to make a centerpiece for her crown. The queen's face lights up brighter than her hair. "He will indeed be welcome. Soon, I hope. One more thing, if you'll pardon me, lady. How far ahead do you get these shipping orders? Would you know if there is one directed to Blue Flower's healing room about 3 years from now? You understand that now doesn't mean to me what it does to you, but I will try to talk in years to you so you'll understand. Yes, I have an order for 1 bewinged egg to arrive at that very place. The egg arrived. It doesn't have wings. Has it hatched yet?" "No." She laughs. "Well, it would be a pretty sight to see an egg flying about, bumping into things account of its eyes are still inside the shell. So a flying egg can't scan, but boots with eyes do." "Boots with eyes? Well, of course. Glad to make your acquaintance, Boots. I failed to acknowledge you before." I shake my head. If I ever get to the bell ringer's wedding, I'm sure I'm going to need a lesson in sanctity table manners. I climb off the queen's lap and bid her farewell. Or I should say Boots and I, go through the outdoor and down to the shore, and I look back one last time to see Fathom's rock flashing as if it was the lady waving. Boot, can't tell which one first, hits the water. If there are any sea monsters on the way back to the Sancti Mount, I sleep through them. When I open my eyes, I'm standing on the mount, and Browl is fluttering impatiently in front of my face. "Boots are ready to move on," he said, "but I told them you promised me, more or less, that I could take you out of them." He lifts me out and seats me on Big Dog. I look back at Boots, and they're squirming about like they're getting ready to run a race. Whatever they say about being bendable, they've got something like knees. I also see that there is blood running down them from the top to the toes. "I'm afraid I've bled on you, Boots," I say regretfully. "It's an honor, Orion's granddaughter." And then I look the Boots straight in the eyes and see that they're brining, and the salt water mixed with blood have made a little rivulet that appears to be springing from Boots' toes. And that is the last thing I do see. 26th Scribble. Dying animal, heart of my heart. It worries me that I can't see Big Dog. Somehow I thought I'd always be able to see the Sancti folk, even if I couldn't see anything else. Not seeing makes me feel more alone. I know I need to sleep a bit afore we go on. I tell this to Big Dog, Browl, and Match, and afterwards I say, "I can't help myself. You 3 won't think of going on without me, will you?" Big Dog says, "Grrr." Match hisses. Browl says, "Law," in a voice of not disdain, but indignation that I should suggest such a thing. I wake, and we do go on, together. I hear Big Dog's firm tread, Match's breathing, the flutter of Browl's wings. I hear Pat's bell around my neck, and the lady-hair grasses rustling in the breeze. Once I almost think I hear the Sancti bell singing, but my ears haven't learnt to make up for my eyes well enough yet for that to last. Don't know how long this goes on, if there's time as I've known it up hith at all, or if it's more like it is in the half-Sancti places across the sea. But afore I'm too tired again, I'm always tired and getting weaker, Big Dog stops and lies down. "Why are we stopping, Big Dog?" Big Dog says nothing, but in the dark next to him I feel the heat of another, I'd say critter, but I sense it's too sancty for that common word. Another animal, an even bigger one, and I hear its breathing, warm-blooded as Match isn't. Big Dog leans towards it, and I crip I'm meant to climb on the back of whatever it is. I do, with a bit of help from Match and Browl, account of I'm none too steady. The animal's fur is coarse and soft at the same time. I feel about for what I can reach of it, hoping that it takes no offense. At last I feel up its head, and it has antlers too tall for me to reach the top of. Could it be? How I hope. I feel around forward and down to its breast, and my fingers slip into a wound, one that's bleeding. Hart, I whisper, and start brining. I find I'm brining for his wound more than for any of my own. At last you've come to me, he says, and his voice is as deep as the earth and the ocean combined. Let us take comfort in one another, child of mine. For a while that is all we do. Then he says, something troubles you, child. Tell me. I'm afraid. I've tried not to think what'll happen when I get up the Sancti Mount, but now I'll not see Prester's tower, the side tree that is, and I'll not see the stars, and if I'm meant to go up the Sancti stairs, I'll not see them either, and I'm sure as I can be I'll need to go up them. I'm dying, Hart. I am dying also, child of mine. That's different. Is it? After a pause, I say, no, it isn't, but you'll never go elsewhere. Account of you already belong to elsewhere, and you won't need the Sancti stairs, nor an invitation from the ringer either. I'm not sorry I gave mine away, but I wish I could have kept it at the same time without denying it to another. You have spent much of your 12 years on this earth in thinking about what you don't have, haven't you, child? The company of your twin Prester, tame hair, freedom to scribble. What else? Charter's love, Fathom's faith, Conifer's vision, Pennydance's beauty, Carrywish's steadiness, Fondest's and Rightful's joy, Mariago's elsewhereness. Perhaps also Specially's hope? I'm sorry, Hart. I know that's what I'm supposed to have, but I don't. I never had much. Tell me instead what you do have, with you. You were given gifts by your fam before you came to me. What have you left? Pat's bell, Matt's egg. I left Fathom's magnific rock over the sea. I've got the loan of Browl from Con. Don't know how long that will last. Got my old scribble that I can't see to read from Pennydance. Got just a bite and a sip of Carrywish's bread and wine. I gave Fondest's water to save Mariago. Bit of oil left in Rightful's cruise. You already know about Mariago's wedding invitation. Are you willing to do what I tell you with what remains? I'm afraid of losing even more. I'm sorry, Hart, but I trust you, and I'll do what you tell me. Put your Pat's bell around the neck of Boreal Owl. It will be a comfort to your fam when the bird returns to its master. Give the egg to the owl also, to keep beneath its wing. You don't have enough blood warmth left to hatch anything. Keep the rest of the herbs, and keep that scribble of yours. Even if you can't read it, there may be others that need to. You need your strength, so finish the last of the bread and wine. Thrust the cruse of oil into my breast. It will be safe, Thith. I do as he says. Bell and egg to Browl, bread and wine to me. I press the oil into Hart's breast, and it sinks to Whith I can't feel it any more. We're quiet again for a while. Then I say, Hart? Yes, child of mine? I wish I could see your white fur, only I'm afraid my bleed is staining it terribly. Nothing can stain my fur, child, not even my own blood. Now I think it's time for us to climb to the next stage. Us? You're to ride on me now. What about Big Dog? You don't need him any more, but if you wish, he'll stay with you as long as I do. I do wish, but I thought maybe I'd sleep again before we climb on. You need not fear sleeping while you ride on me. You'll find the rhythm of my pace will help you to sleep easier. Like a lullaby. 27th Scribble. Lullaby. All the music a body needs. I wake up, mumbling. Match, we're out of ink. No, we're not. I thought I heard you snoring. Couldn't if I tried. Good. Account of you've got to keep scribbling this till Scribble is done. Don't my tail know it. By the way, Big Dog and White Hart are gone. You're lying on ladyhair grass, in case you hadn't noticed. Browl's still with us, though. I expect you can hear the bell. Actually, I think Browl's the one who's snoring. Browl? Who? I can tell that I've roused Browl out of dreams of whatever owls do dream of. I'm trying not to dwell on White Hart and Big Dog. I'm sure White Hart would say I don't need them anymore, but I wish they'd let me say goodbye. And I'm pretty sure there's only one stage left from Hith to the top of the Sancti Mount. How can I get Thith now? I don't think I could crawl that far before I run out of blood.
Can't ask Browl to lift me account of that underwing egg. So I lie hith, and hith I'll go on lying till I go elsewhere or another ride comes along. There's not enough sound amid the blind dark to keep me busy hearing it for very long. There's not enough now. So I say, Browl, what does the lullaby mean? What does the verse mean? It means what it means. Well, there you are then. But I know most of what that means. Since I thought on it last, I've seen the crooked town and the castle twisted, and I've helped the prisoner escape, and I crossed the sea in the ram-hide boots, and I've held the dying animal in my arms. Prester's tower is the side tree now. So the only thing I can't crip is the white wings. I've heard there's bewinged things as have them, but I've never seen one. Maybe the egg... You think too much, say Match and Browl together. No doubt, I say. But back to the lullaby. How many words are in the lullaby? Browl quizzes me. I have to work it out on my fingers. Ah, la dee die, la dee do o day. Ah, la dee do o. 14. How many lines in the verse? That I already know. 14. I can feel Browl's wise nod, even though I can't see it. Sancti number. Is that why we do the 14 to steady ourselves? Come to think, I haven't done them regular since we started up this mountain. Haven't felt like I needed to. Maybe it's a good thing to do anyway, like saying the verse from time to time. Have you ever breathed the 14, Browl? Twice, thrice, times 4, times 5. I breathe them with every breath. Of course you do. That's perfect sancti-doxyology, which is a little beyond the ordinary kind. How about you, Match? My breath runs a little hot to breathe that deep, account of when I let it out. Yes, crazy as my hair is, I prefer not to have it go up in flames. I was wondering, it's so poison stink quiet, or maybe the poison stinks in me and not the quiet. Do you think we could sing the lullaby? You and me, Browl? Not that I can sing worth hearing. And you, Match? I might throw a little counterpoint in now and again. Dragons run on a bit of a different rhythm, you know. Of course you do. Who's going to start? Ah, la-dee-die, la-dee-do, oh day. It's Browl, whom I've never heard sing. It gives me chills, sancti chills. Ah, la-dee-do, oh, I respond. Not much voice in me above a breath. Ah, la-dee-die, la-dee-do, oh day. Browl takes it up again without a pause. And I after, and I hear Match. It's the same words, the same melody, but offset from the other two of us. And I know this must be closer to what it sounds like in the sancti places. All different, yet all together. Only Browl and I are trading places. The three of us are never singing at once. So I say, what if you start, Browl, and keep going, and then I start after you, but from the beginning, and Match keeps on doing what he's doing. You've got some music in you, you do, observes Browl. Meanwhile, Match is droning the same note, impatiently waiting for us to get on with it. So we do. I can't tell how long the night is, account of it's always dark to me, and truth is, I don't memorial seeing the sun since we've been climbing. Seems like we sing forever, and seems like the stars join us, and I don't feel tired once, until we get to the end. Not that there properly is one, but we seem to be in accord that for this time it's time to stop. Now that we've stopped, I can hear something I couldn't hear before we started. Sort of a tapping sound. Eggs hatching, says Match matter-of-factly. True, Browl agrees. My heart is suddenly full of strange hope, and it gets stranger when I hear a crack, and a voice more elsewhere than I've heard yet starts singing the lullaby in another language. Match, are you scribbling this? I'd like to memorial... And I listen so hard that it clean knocks me out.
28th Scribble. White wings. I hear their color. What time is it, Match? I yawn. Who cares, says Browl. It's going to take you to the top of the Sancti Mount. It's who? Who's it? White bewinged thing. Prester's special bewinged thing. Twin wanted to make sure you're not late. For what? The wedding. I can't say anything for a long while. When I can trust my voice again not to crack too much, I say, tell me what it looks like. Not quite like a snowy egret. Not quite like a swan. Not quite like a... Never mind, Browl, since I don't even know what those look like. Is he beautiful, Match? Most fair, bewinged thing I've seen. Excepting myself. I can't be any judge of that. You say it's going to take me to the top of Sancti Mount? Is it big enough to carry me? Big enough to ride, it is. Out of that little egg? More room in it than it looked like, seemingly. Browl pauses, then says hesitantly, I need to tell you, now White Wings has come, it's time for me to go back to Conifer. I swallow. Are you leaving too, Match? Only ever left that one night since I come. Never will again. With were you that night? With your going. I had to make sure of the way. I feel like every mortal critter has been fashing my way except me. No matter, so long as I get to whatever it is. Prester's bewinged thing, explains Browl, doesn't speak your language. It only speaks Sancti. So if it needs to tell you something, Match will have to translate. Can you, Match? I ask. Match snorts. I am fluent in every known language, especially Sancti. But I think you may speak a bit yourself. What do you hear when you listen to bewinged things? What kind of bewinged things? Any kind. Do you hear noise? I hear sound. I wouldn't call it noise, more like song. Maybe you won't need me to translate too much after all. Now come climb on the back of White Wings. Browl and I will help guide you thith, and then Browl needs to say goodbye. I climb onto White Wings' back. Bird is truly very large, or at least long. I stretch all the way out on it, from fingertip to toe tip, and I can feel the end of it, but the feel of those feathers. If I had to choose between going on feeling them and getting my eyesight back, well, there wouldn't be a thing to think on. I can feel their whiteness, and when they're ruffling, I can hear white. I am suddenly thankful for my white wearing cloth, otherwise I could never dare to ride something even whiter. Is there any message you want me to take back to my special be-armed thing? Browl croaks, trying, I think, not to brine. I'm brining as I say. Tell Con... tell him... Without him, I can't imagine. Will do. Hoo, hoo. And Browl touches beak to the middle of my forehead. I hear the sound of the bell grow more and more distant till it's gone. Specially. I don't need to ask who said that, account of the voice itself is white. I thought you only spoke Sancti. Match answers. And what language did you think the names of the Sancti stars were in? There is some back and forth between his voice and White Wings that, though I can't exactly crip it, makes me tingle so that I feel my whole head of hair standing straight up, and I almost feel it's going to carry me off. White Wings wants to know, translates Match, whether we're ready to go now. To the foot of the side tree? Tell it. That, at least, says Match. It may take us by a more interesting route than straight up. What I mean is, seems like straight up is exactly what it intends to take us. Before Match's last word is out, I know we're already far past the foot of the side tree. Maybe we're going to go all the way up it. But there isn't any all the way up it, so... All the life I can memorial, I've had dreams of flying. Sometimes aloft, when I was closest to the stars, I almost thought I could. I admit to jumping off, only slightly, high things, when I was little and flapping my arms and hoping hard that I'd got a wind enough going. And I memorial dreams, a few, in which I actually got off the ground and stayed off, and how free I felt as long as it lasted. I knew when I was in the air no one could expect me to be grounded. Morning dew in the head is just as it should be when your head is among the clouds. But mostly I'd go up so short a time I couldn't realize it, then hit the ground again, and again. And the worst dreams were, when I not only couldn't get my feet off the ground, I couldn't get any of me off it. And I'd dig in my fingernails and claw my way forward. And if I was sleeping holding Penny Dance's hand, I'd be woken by her ouch, and her snatching her hand away. Con never let go, though, only gripped my hand more firmly. He cripped. Now I know that even when I thought I was flying in my dreams, I wasn't. This is what it is to fly. Perfect stillness except for feathers and wind, feathers and wind, feathers and... If I don't ground my head just a little, I'm going to fall asleep, and maybe fall off. With would I land, I wonder? In what elsewhere land? And now it's not just feathers and wind, it's voices, talking, laughing, singing. I can only crip a word hith and thith, account of their plainly speaking Sancti, but I hear the lullaby in the midst of it, and I hear the clinking together of drinking cups, and there are rising scents of steaming food that I think are going to strike me dead with just their smell, and a passing hand, or a hand that were passing, presses a bite of something into my mouth that'll slay me surer than poison account of its sancty food. And one hand after another on both sides of me reaches out to take my hand, so I have to let partly go of White Wings and hang on with my knees. And every time a hand takes mine, right, left, and so on and on, a voice says, "Specially." And each voice is a different one, and I realize for the first time that my name is Beautiful. At last a hand takes my right and doesn't let go. White Wings hovers. Match whispers in my ear, but I don't need Match to tell me whose hand it is. I can feel that whom going up my arm and all the way through me, and my mind is so wonder-dumb that I can't memorial his name. And after I've finally fumbled and stumbled through mud enough to get free of it and say, "Prester," that hand lays my hand in another hand, saying, "The host of the wedding wants to meet you." This is too much for me in this weak body habitat. The next time I'm aware again, White Wings is on the ground, and Match is sounding like even he needs to get his breath back. When I can finally get a deep one in, I smell from very close what I've only ever smelt breeze-borne, sweeter and spicier and richer than anything in Matt's herb store, wildest of all bespringing things. And I hear, so clear I can't realize it, the sound of branches dancing. I know what branches they are. I could never mistake that sigh for any other. 29th Scribble. Prester's Tower. I feel it, and I start to see. "Match," I yell in a panic. "It's morning-wise, and you didn't tell me." My own voice startles me awake. "Didn't need to, seemingly," Match answers. "It's true. Though I can see no more now than I could in the night, I feel sun shining on me from between side tree branches. First sun I've felt since Big Dog brought me out of the cave. The side tree. I'm at its foot now. I'm at the foot of Prester's Tower. Shaking, I climb off the back of White Wings and go hands afore knees forward, closer and closer, through something vine-like with flowers that ring the tree round. I know the feel of those better than the feel of my hair. How could I not? Morning dews. Around the side tree. Morning dews. I can't crawl on. I fall on my face and laugh for a while, and Match laughs with me, and I even think I hear something like a laugh coming from White Wings, but it's in sancty. When I recover myself, I get back on my knees and keep crawling, reaching my hands in front of me so I won't miss the tree, as if I could. I feel it afore I feel it, if that can scan. My hands are moving really slow now, account of now that it comes to it, I'm afraid. I think maybe I oughtn't to touch it, so it touches me. It does. If it's going to kill me to touch it, I'm lost now. I open both hands as wide as my fingers will let me. I can't tell what its bark feels like. The instant I touch it, Muddy Head comes back in a blaze of pain, dizziness, and too much light. Then the mud recedes, and I'm not just touching Side Tree, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing Prester's Tower. And I've got more joy in that than in the fact that I'm seeing again. But I'm still weak, so I pull myself up by the tree to sitting and put my arms further around it. I look up as far as my head will lean back, knowing that it's not possible to see the top. It's not possible. What I see, this isn't possible. The tree is dying. There can't be any mistake, account of I know what dying feels like. Every needle turning from golden green to brown and even almost to black, every branch sagging like arms that can hold themselves up no more. How can the sanctiest bespringing thing there is, and maybe ever was, die? How can the heart die, says someone, maybe Match, maybe White Wings, maybe me, maybe all three. I brine so much, if my tears could save the Side Tree, they'd do it. If my blood could heal it, I'd give all I have left. All I have left. I have something else left. Something the cousin said I should use to heal my own wound. I don't think it's me or the Side Tree, account of it's all the same thing. I take the pouch of healing herbs and pour what's left of them out as an offering to Prester's Tower. I'm not surprised at how fast the tree comes back and grows more glorious than ever aforetime. I knew it would. And I know now that I really am going to stay hith until I go elsewhere. Even if I didn't go elsewhere, with else would I go from hith? I could never go back down the Sancti Mount. Even Khan would crip that.
maybe Con especially. He'd know that if I lived it would need to be as the Lady of the Side Tree of Prester's Tower. The fam could come to visit me, and maybe others too, and maybe I'd learn to help them read the stars. But I know that's all mornin' dew. By time anyone crips to come hith, I'll be long bled out. And now that seems plain, I don't mind. I'm happy to be hith, even if I can't make the sancty stairs. If this is as near as I can get to the wedding, it's near enough. Is that you clearing your throat, Match? Seems like you like to interrupt me when I'm thinking my best thoughts. They're not my best thoughts? Well, what are my best thoughts, then? Someone thinks, Match says pointedly. I'm not saying who. You're forgetting something. But I'm hith now. I'm done. What is there left to memorial? And what are you doing waving your tail around like that? Leastwise, I guess your tail's still thith, though I can't see it for its coating of sancty ink. If your tail is trying to scribble that crazily, no one will ever be able to read the parchment. The parchment! The last gift. Penny dances. My scribble! When I'm able to see, to read it, I'm supposed to read it. I am able, and I don't want to. What could be less doxology than to finally be at Prester's Tower and read a scribble I wrote at the age of 7? I know I'll hate it. I know it'll shame me mortally. I know my cheeks will turn as scarlet as Penny Dance's wearing cloth. Do you good, says Match. Your cheeks are whiter than white itself. Since there is no such thing, that can't be right. Read the scribble. I know I have to. I pull it out, and reluctantly unroll it. I see my own letters, and part of me thinks how crooked they are. Another part thinks how they haven't improved much. This scribble seems to have a title. Bell Ringer's Wedding, Self-Invitation, in case. Scribbled by me, specially. Out loud, says Match. No, I say. Yes. All right. If the side tree dies again with hearing it, it'll be your fault. I read, Can big dog fly me, bell ringer? Up side tree, upstairs. However high, to white wings feasting place? My arms are open. Take me into them. Take back my moss and mud. I can't scribble like you, the verse fasher. I can't light fires like Big Match, nor trample twists like Big Bear. But I've watched and I've waited since elsewhere time and beyond, sancty as I'm not, and now it's in your Verriest own hands. We were together in one womb, Prester and me. We were twin-born. I crip his voice, and I crip the feel of him and the smell of him. But my together story with you goes back even afore. If my love for you were all mornin' dew, but it's not. You're my bread and wine more than any. Don't let go of me, Ringer. I'm your task still, and I'm running out of patience, and I can see too much, but I need to trust you like I can't trust myself. My hair is my crown of 1,000 mornin' dews, that I've tried to be solemn in wearing, and my eyes are tired with being gold, and my hope is somewhat up near the specially star. I want to stay in your true habitat, but it's too constant for the likes of me. I want it to be starlight thith, listening to the sancty sibs, with the lady's hand in my one and Prester's in the other. I want to be grounded, but more than that, I want it to be mornin'-wise.
And you still with me, not gone with my dreaming.
I want it to be mornin'-wise, with your cloak cast about me, and my hand in your hand. I want it to be mornin'-wise. The parchment flutters to the foot of the side tree like a fallen leaf. I've read this afore, I say. You've written this afore, Match says. Matter of fact, I ordered you to. Prester's verse that I wrote lately was modeled after an invitation of the bell ringer's wedding that I wrote 5 years ago? Looks that way. But I don't memorial scribbling this. How could I not? Exactly. Unless I wanted not to. Exactly. And this thing I tried to forget is my last hope of getting up the sancty stairs, seeing as how I gave my real invitation away. Match is silent. I don't feel like laughing, but I don't feel like brining either. All I really want to do is lie on my back and look up at the side tree. Before I revisited that old scribble, that's as much as I ever felt I needed to do again. And it still is.
I gaze up and take deep breaths of the side-tree air. If I might make so bold, Match says, I would suggest you nap for a bit. The side-tree by starlight is a sight not to be missed. I just got my sight back and you're saying I should shut my eyes? That's you and your sanctity doxology all over. Well, I might, and then again maybe I mightn't. If I do, it won't be for a good long time yet. I can't crip how I could not memorial that Scribble. I can't crip how I could forget that I did want to wed, but only with the bell ringer. Was it account of thinking too much on Prester? Was it account of my anger at the one that begot Charter on Matt? My grief over penny dance? My frustration with my hair and the morning dews? Could I have been a little mad at the ringer himself for letting me be the only among my fam without a particular bewinged thing? Or is it just account of I'm not constant enough for the likes of him? Is it just my mossy-gathering, muddy, morning-dewy, unspecial self? My mossy-gathering, muddy morning... Specially, wake up. My eyes are full open. The bell-ringer's stars are out. Was I talking in my sleep, Match? Altogether too much. My professional opinion as your particular bewinged thing is that you should shut up and look up. Noticing he's missing, I ask, where's White Wings? Still talking? It's getting ready for the dance. What dance? Still? The wedding dance. Just look. I look up as hard and straight as I can. I am looking. Still? Even I'm not so pride-child as to open my mouth after that. Amazing how much you can see when you're not distracted by the sound of your own voice. I can see the sanctity stars clearer than ever I have, but they're not keeping to their places. They're moving in and out of each other and around the side tree, which does go all the way up. The stars are dancing. I knew they could sing, but I see White Wings. It is dancing up Thith. And I think I'm going to brine Big Match and Big Bear and Big Dog, all of them dancing. And, except for Match, every particular bewinged thing of the fam, great blue heron, gerfalcon, golden eagle, stormy petrel, boreal owl, mockingbird, black spice phoebe finch, hummingbird, and more are coming up and joining now. All blue flowers, not particular bewinged things. Flutterbies, bumblebees, moths, ladybirds, copper beetles. Wait, Hart doesn't have wings, but then he wouldn't need them. Gravity couldn't keep him down. And I see other things without wings, every kind of critter, maybe every critter. And I can't crip how it can't be more crowded. Even humans, even some I think I know. I surely know the cousin and his mat. I'm thinking that one over Thith must be the second elder, and the one with him, his wife Pennydance, and the one with them, their daughter Mariago. Is that Matt's adoptive Matt and Pat? Is that Matt's nurse? Grandpat Orion and his boots are dancing with him, and his wife, whose name I've never known, and sancty folk, the twin king and queen. The more of them I see, the more complicated the dance is getting. I could never follow that. If only I could dance like Pennydance. If only I could really fly. And now I just have to say something. Match, why aren't you going up Thith with the rest? And what are you doing fussing around with my hair? Licking it, pinching it, heating it, cooling it. There's really no help for it, you know. Match answers, I'm making it aerodynamic. Aero what? Flotatious. Do you think you could sit up for a minute, specially? I do, and he flies back and forth in front of my face, examining my hair critically. Something missing, he decides. Something missing. Ah! He nips off 2 morning dew flowers and arranges one over each of my ears. One for you, he says, and one for whomever you're going to wed. Don't, he interrupted me before I speak. Don't ask me to tell you who that is, if you don't know. This is such an ornery remark that I feel like answering him in spite of knowing that I should be still. But my hair is doing strange things. I think it's trying to take my head off. Stand up, specially, says Match. I believe you'll find you can. I haven't stood on my own since I started the bleed. I try to stand, wobble some, try again, wobble a bit more, but every time I wobble my hair refuses to let me down. I see that it's turned white, and the 2 morning dews above my ears are twirling. My feet are off the ground. My toes are pointing downward. Match is flying round and round the ascending me, crying gleefully, You see? You see? You see? And I'm up among the rest of them, and hands are taking mine like they did at the wedding. But now I can see them doing it, and I'm taking theirs back. And we're not just passing one another, we're weaving something together. We're weaving an elsewhere story with our dance. And I know I shouldn't be thinking of myself at all, but I'm flying, dance flying. Oh, glory, oh, glory, glory, glory. The light brightens. Mornin' Wise is coming. All the partners in the star, bewinged everyone wedding dance are bidding each other good night and greeting the sun. They all fly off whatever it is they need to go. Match is back on my shoulder, and we sink gently to the ground under the side tree, which after the Sancti stars is the last one to leave off dancing. Match and I land. Someone lands next to us. It's White Wings. I'm so glad. Except when I look again, it's not White Wings I see. It's Prester. I feel like the last bit of blood just drained from me. Prester catches me and lays me among the morning dews. 30th Scribble. How I sleep, holding Prester's hand. Match, Match, shouldn't you have woke me? Surely by now it's getting to be mornin' wise. Which mornin' wise? There's been more than one? Come to think on it, you're right. A memorial the first time I opened my eyes hith since the dance. I looked to my right, and thith was Prester, sleeping, holding my hand. I don't think he needs to sleep. I think he does it for my sake, to be twin-like. He is so fair. But I could only look at him for the time it takes to do the 14, and my eyelids shut again, like there were the opposite of bewinged things dragging them down. And I seemed to memorial another mornin' wise, when I couldn't keep my eyes open, one when something portentous happened. But I can't memorial what it was. Anyway, when I ask whether it's mornin' wise, you know very well what I mean. Not is it a mornin' wise, but is it the mornin' wise, the one of the wedding? Not yet, you say. You say White Wings says my face is still whiter than its wings, and I need to rest longer. You say Prester says my face is still whiter than our wearing cloths, and I need to get my color back. Not all my color, I hope. I'd sooner my hair stayed white as Mariago's rather than go back to mud. Maybe if I slept more instead of stewing, I'd heal faster? I'm sure you're right. But I know there was a mornin' wise that I need to memorial to sleep proper. Who's holding my left hand? I don't know, Match. You tell me. I know it's not Penny Dance. Oh, Match, now I memorial the lady. One mornin' wise I opened my eyes for the space of the 14, and I was looking on the face of a lady who was holding my head in her lap and singing me the lullaby. She was something like Matt, and something like the Tower ladies as I've imagined them, and something like the twin queen across the sea whose hair is a world, and even something like the specially I wish I was. But she was more a lady than any of those, account of she looked like the bell ringer. I could tell that, though I haven't seen him. She's the critter that most looks like him as ever was. And I asked her if she'd hold my left hand while I kept resting, and she said she'd do better. She'd take me and Prester in her arms, and hold one hand each of the both of us. She took my hand in hers, and Prester's right hand in hers too. Her arms have a wide reach, and I knew I had the bell ringer's own benet to keep my eyes closed till whenever he should tell me to keep them open. But I had to ask her. You know me, Match. I had to. Was the scribble I'd done when I was 7 enough to pass for a wedding invitation? After all, it was a self-invite. She smiled and said it'd do. But I'd scribbled something since that would more than do. I can't think what that could be, unless it's this one you're taking down for me now. And if that wasn't enough comfort, she said that when I woke enough to go up to the Sancti stairs, I'd go with one hand in Prester's and one in hers. She said however less fair my invitation was, I'd be admitted to the wedding without a question if I was in their company. Thanks for memorialing me of that, Match. Don't know how I could have forgot it. And I don't know how many more mornin' wises I'll have to wake to and shut my eyes again afore the mornin' wise comes. I expect the bell ringer will crip if I'm slow. On that mornin' wise, be sure to wake me, Match. You'll memorial? I know you will. You always do. And now sing me the lullaby, Match, a kind of I need to sleep. Ah, la-dee-di, la-dee-do, oh day, ah, la-dee-do, oh. Mornin' wise.